Are you living or performing? You wake up. You dress. You smile in the mirror. You say the right things. Laugh at the right time. Carry yourself like someone who belongs. But who are you doing it for? There's a kind of silence behind our gestures, a pause between our lines, a space where the real self waits, watching the role unfold. You've been applauded for being composed, praised for being dependable, admired for being kind. But did anyone ever see you, not the version tailored for approval, but the part of you that exists in the quiet, unscripted hours? From the moment we enter the world, we begin to learn how to perform. As children, we're taught what earns love, what draws laughter, what gets punished. We adjust. We learn to please, to survive, to adapt to the audience, the teacher, the parent, the partner. And soon we forget there was ever a version of ourselves that didn't need rehearsal. We curate. We edit. We dress for the part. Even in solitude, we perform for an imagined audience. The one in our head, the one we believe is always watching. We laugh when we don't feel joy. We say, "I'm fine," when we're breaking. We succeed so others will envy us, even as the applause feels hollow. When does it stop? When does life become living and not just acting? Sometimes the mask fits so well we forget it's there. We play the achiever, the good child, the loyal friend, the fearless leader. But the role is not the person. And when we're alone, truly alone, we feel the weight of pretending. The way silence accuses us of faking it. The way stillness demands something true. And the scariest part, we perform not just for others, but for ourselves. We build an identity and convince ourselves it's natural. We tell stories about who we are and then live as if they were laws. But if you stopped performing, if you dropped the role, what would remain? Would there be anything left? Would the world still look at you the same way? Would you? Some people chase authenticity as if it's a destination. But what if it's not found in a single act of rebellion, but in the small, quiet refusals? Refusing to laugh when it's not funny. Refusing to nod when you don't agree. Refusing to smile when your heart aches. Those moments, fleeting as they are, might be closer to truth than any mask we've perfected. And yet, performance isn't always a lie. Sometimes we perform to protect, sometimes to survive, sometimes to create space for a self that hasn't fully formed. But when the performance becomes the only voice you speak with, the only face you show, it begins to blur the line. So ask yourself, not once, but often, are you living or just performing? And if you've performed long enough, do you even know the difference anymore? Or have you become the role, a pattern so practiced it now performs itself, with or without you? What if you're just a pattern? You sit quietly, thinking you're in control, that your choices arise from reason, that your preferences are yours. But what if the person you call I is just a looping algorithm? A constellation of impulses, habits, reactions, shaped by years you don't even remember. What if you're not a person with patterns, but a pattern pretending to be a person? We like to believe we are authors of our lives, that we make decisions, that we change, but science whispers something colder. The brain is a prediction machine. It doesn't wait. It guesses. It fills in gaps. It chooses before you know you've chosen. It responds before you've had time to reflect. Thought follows action, not the other way around. The you who decides might just be the you who rationalizes. You laugh the way your parent did. You tense your jaw like someone from childhood. You sabotage when you feel love, because once, long ago, love meant danger. These aren't decisions. These are echoes, patterns repeating, scripts running. The mind is stage for familiar characters. Even your dreams follow rhythms. Your fears wear old costumes. Your pleasures are shaped by what once gave relief. The same jokes make you laugh. The same wounds ache. The same roads pull you back, again and again, as if you're not walking them, but being walked. So what does that make you? A person? a self, or just a beautifully complex routine, one that believes it's free. Some philosophies embrace this. The Buddhists speak of anatta, no self, that the self is not a thing, but a process, a stream, ever-changing, never graspable. Neuroscience seems to nod in agreement. There is no single place in the brain where you reside, just circuits, firings, flow. And yet, you feel real. You suffer. You love. You hope. Doesn't that count for something? Even if you are a pattern, doesn't the pattern still matter? Maybe the problem isn't being a pattern. Maybe the danger is forgetting that you are. Because when you forget, the pattern runs unchecked. It becomes belief. It becomes identity. It becomes the cage you mistake for home. But when you notice it, truly notice, it trembles. Because patterns don't like to be seen. They break beneath awareness. And as one pattern ends, another presence begins to stir. Who is watching you think? You notice a thought pass through your mind. Not a loud one, just a flicker, a quiet phrase, a mental image, a reaction you didn't choose. And something in you observes it. Not with judgment, not even with curiosity, just presence. There it goes, a thought, and yet, if you can observe the thought, then who or what is doing the watching? There's a strange doubling inside us, a voice that speaks and a listener who hears it, a part that feels and another that notices the feeling. You flinch in anger, but another part whispers, "You're angry," you daydream, and then realize you've drifted. Awareness returns. But where was it before? Are you the thought or the one who watches? The mind is not a single voice. It's a crowd, a constant swirl of noise, instinct, memory, and meaning. But within that storm, there's a center, a silence that sees, and sometimes it feels like the only real part of you. Meditation traditions call it the witness. Psychology calls it meta-awareness. Mystics call it the soul. Neuroscientists might call it attention, or working memory, or a neurological illusion. But none of these names touch the experience. Because when you're truly watching your thoughts, not analyzing, not fixing, just watching, something profound begins to unfold. You realize that most of what you think isn't really yours. It's habit, it's memory, it's voices you've absorbed from others, echoes you've mistaken for truth. And beneath that chatter, something watches. What is that watcher made of? It doesn't have a face. It doesn't speak. It doesn't interrupt. But it notices everything. It has seen every fear, every desire, every lie you've told yourself, and it has said nothing, not out of apathy, but because it doesn't need to speak. Its presence is enough. Sometimes, late at night, when everything else is still, you can feel it, that quiet witness. The part of you that has been here the whole time, the one that knew, even when you didn't, the one that never looked away. But how deep does that watcher go? And if you keep following its gaze, do you ever reach the bottom? Or is it just mirrors watching mirrors forever? Can the mind escape itself? You close your eyes to find stillness. And yet the noise follows. Not the sound of traffic or ticking clocks, but the mind itself, spinning, narrating, predicting, remembering, reacting. It speaks even when you want silence. It argues even when you're alone, and when you try to quiet it, it only grows louder. So how do you escape the mind? Using the mind. We try. Through distraction, through control, through thought spirals disguised as solutions. We overthink our way into calm, analyze our way into peace. But the mind trying to silence the mind is like a fire trying to put itself out. It burns even harder. You might tell yourself, be present, but who's giving that command, and who's supposed to obey? You meditate, but then wonder if you're doing it right. You seek peace, but then judge your failure to reach it. Each effort becomes another loop, another echo, another trap. The mind is a brilliant architect and an expert escape artist. It builds the maze and then tells you where to run. It manufactures fear, then sells you solutions. It wounds and then takes credit for the healing. And because it wears your voice, you rarely question it. Can the mind escape itself? Maybe not by force, not by strategy, but by noticing. By watching without chasing, without correcting, just observing. When you see a thought arise and choose not to follow, something shifts. When you let the emotion move through you without naming it, a door opens. Not out, but in. Not escape, but release. And yet, even that idea, the watcher, the still point, is something the mind can seize, turn into another identity, another concept to control. Awareness itself becomes performance, and the trap resets. So where does freedom begin? Maybe it's not in escaping the mind, but in seeing that you were never fully inside it to begin with, that there is a space between the thoughts, a stillness before the name, a presence that does not think, but notices thinking. Not a voice, not a thought, but the vast quiet openness in which all of it unfolds. And maybe that space, so easily missed, is where you begin to remember a different kind of self. One that was never tangled in thought, but waiting behind the roles. Is there a you beneath roles? You enter a room and become someone. Not because you've changed, but because something in you knows who you're supposed to be. With your parents, you're one version. With friends, another. At work, a third. Sometimes these versions overlap. Sometimes they collide, and sometimes you wonder if there's anyone beneath them at all. Who is the you that isn't performing a part? From early on, we learn the rules of the roles we're expected to play. The good student, the responsible sibling, the funny friend, the strong partner. We don't choose these scripts, they're assigned. We improvise, but we rarely question the stage. And over time, the role starts to feel like the reality. You laugh in certain ways, say things you don't fully mean, suppress feelings you're not allowed to show, not because you're fake, but because every role has rules, and we follow them to keep peace, to stay liked, to avoid chaos. But in those quiet moments, late at night, or alone in a crowd, something slips. The smile fades, the pose softens, and for just a second, you glimpse something else. Someone else. But who? Is there a real self beneath the roles? Or are you just a collage of them? Some psychologists argue that identity is role-based, that we're not hiding our true selves. We are the masks, that what we call authenticity is just consistency across performances. But others sense something deeper, a presence that doesn't change, a sense of self that remains even when the roles fall away. You might catch it in silence, when you're not trying to be anything for anyone, when no one is watching and you stop watching yourself. There in that stillness, something feels true, not performative, not polished, just present. But it doesn't speak in sentences. It doesn't explain itself. It waits. It watches. It's not a role. It's the stage beneath them all. So is there a you beneath the roles? Not a perfect, unchanging self, but maybe a quiet awareness that isn't trying to win, or prove, or please. A self not built to be seen, but simply to be. And if you sit with it long enough, something unfamiliar begins to stir. A you that remembers not who you've been, but who you are, when memory no longer speaks. Are you you without memory? Imagine waking up in a room with no name. You recognize nothing. You remember nothing. There are no photographs, no voices, no history reaching out to claim you. Would you still be you? Memory is our anchor. It ties us to people, to places, to the idea of a life lived. We use it to explain who we are, to justify how we feel, to decide what comes next. We say, I am this way because of that, as if cause and effect are stitched through us like thread. But if that thread is cut, if the memories vanish, does the self unravel? Amnesia isn't a thought experiment. It happens. People lose entire lifetimes. They forget loved ones, languages, even their own names. Yet, they don't disappear. They speak. They laugh. They suffer. They form new preferences, new habits, new fears. The self doesn't vanish. It reassembles. But is it the same self? And if it isn't, what changed? Some say memory is what makes us human. That our ability to time travel through the mind is the core of consciousness. We imagine futures. We revisit the past. We build meaning by connecting them. Without that ability, what remains is presence, pure, aimless presence. But maybe that's not nothing. Maybe what we call identity isn't built from the stories we remember, but from the consciousness that carries them, a deeper awareness. One that doesn't depend on names or dates or narratives. A self that exists not because it remembers, but because it notices. Think of a newborn. It doesn't remember its birth. It doesn't know its name. But it feels. It responds. It is. Not yet a character in a story. Just a presence, alive and alert. If memory defines the person, then who is dreaming? Who is present in the moment a memory forms? Who stands behind the story as it writes itself in real time? Perhaps you are not your memories, but the space they pass through. The mind collects them. The story shapes them. But the watcher behind it all, the presence that observes each thought, each change, remains untouched. It has no biography, no timeline, just awareness. So are you still you without memory? Maybe the better question is, what part of you was never built from memory in the first place? What part of you still feels real when the story falls silent and only the dream remains? Are we just narrating dreams? You wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing. You can't remember the dream. Only the feeling remains, a trace of something: confusion, longing, terror. You try to put words to it. You give it shape, a story. Maybe it was about falling, or being chased, or someone you lost. You fill in the blanks, not because you remember, but because the mind cannot stand the silence. We are story-making creatures, pattern seekers, narrators trying to make sense of shadows. And we don't stop with dreams. We do it with life. A thought arises, and we label it. An emotion stirs, and we give it a reason. A choice is made, and we tell ourselves why. But what if we're not explaining life, only inventing it? The mind doesn't record. It rewrites. Every time you remember, you change the memory. You color it with how you feel now. You smooth out contradictions. You connect dots that were never there. And you believe it, because it feels whole. But maybe life is less like a film and more like a dream you're narrating after it ends. Maybe the story is made, not in the moment, but in the telling. The plot wasn't planned. The symbols weren't chosen. They were felt. They arrived. You woke up, and the mind rushed in to explain what the heart already lived. And if that's true, what else have you narrated into meaning? That moment you call destiny. That mistake you call failure. That relationship you framed as love. Were they real? Or just the most comforting explanation you could find? Would the same events feel different if told a different way? Is the life you live the same as the life you remember living? You don't just live through time, you live through story. Every action folds into narrative. Every silence becomes a subplot. Even your pain must be meaningful, or else why would it exist? But stories come with consequences. They trap as much as they clarify. Once you believe a version of the dream, it becomes hard to wake up. You keep returning to old meanings, old roles, old reasons, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. So are you living or just narrating? Have you ever seen the moment clearly, without rushing to explain it? Without turning it into memory? Without trying to make it mean something? Or is all of life a dream, and all you are is the voice, trying to make sense of its echoes. Why does the self feel fragile? It takes so little to shake you. A strange look, a single word, a small failure, or a moment of being misunderstood, and suddenly everything inside you feels like it's crumbling. Why is it so easy to break? We build our sense of self like a house of glass. Carefully, over time, we craft a version of who we are, what we believe, what we love, what we fear. We protect it. We polish it. We try to hold it steady in a world that constantly shifts. But the smallest tremor, a memory, a criticism, a mirror can crack it. And when it does, we panic, not because we're hurt, but because something deeper is exposed, the truth that this self we've built might not be real, or if it is, that it's not permanent, not fixed, not safe. We spend years constructing identity, but it's not solid ground. It's scaffolding, a structure held up by memory, emotion, repetition, and the stories we tell about ourselves. And when one of those pillars wobbles, when love ends, when belief fades, when we fail, our sense of self shakes with it. You might think you're strong, but strength built on certainty is brittle. When you believe I am this, any threat to that belief feels existential. You defend it not because it's sacred, but because without it, you don't know who you are. Even success can be dangerous. We cling to identities like the reliable one, the smart one, the good one, until a single moment of failure leaves us spinning, not just because we failed, but because the image cracked. The self-portrait we'd painted no longer holds. So we wonder, am I really who I thought I was? Or was it just a mask I wore long enough to believe in? But maybe fragility isn't failure. Maybe it's the first glimpse of something truer, a sign that the self isn't a sculpture, but a process, not a solid form, but a living question. You are not a fixed shape. You are water taking form in different vessels, and when the container breaks, the water isn't gone. It just needs somewhere new to flow. So yes, the self is fragile, but maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe that's where your freedom begins. Because once the self shatters, you can finally ask, what's left when identity fades? What remains when the mirror breaks? And what if what remains was never meant to be held? What if you are the illusion? You look in the mirror and feel a sense of recognition. The eyes, the voice, the name, they all seem to point back to something stable, something called you. But where is it? You can describe your memories, your feelings, your thoughts. You can recall your past and plan your future. But try to find the exact point where you exist, something unchanging beneath the swirl, and it slips away. The closer you look, the more it vanishes. Philosophers have chased the self for centuries. Neuroscientists scan the brain, looking for a central command. Psychologists search for the core personality beneath the layers of experience. But no matter how deep we dig, we find processes, not permanence, shifting emotions, flickering perceptions, neural patterns that change from moment to moment. There's no single spot where the self resides, just movement, just flow. And yet, we're convinced we are someone, not just a body, not just a mind, but a me who owns the experience. The one who chooses, who suffers, who remembers. But what if that me is a convenient fiction? A story told so smoothly, we forget we're telling it. Consider this: a thought arises. It tells you something about the world or about yourself. You believe it. Another follows, and another. Soon, they form a narrative. You assign it to I. I am anxious. I want this. I believe that. But what if that I is not the origin but the result? What if the sense of self is just the mind's way of stitching experience into something coherent? The self gives us continuity. It helps us function, relate, plan, and explain. But it also traps us. When we believe we are this story, we fear change. We cling to control. We resist anything that threatens the illusion. The self becomes a mask that we can't take off, not because it's stuck, but because we forgot it was a mask at all. In meditation, there are moments when the story softens, when thoughts pass like clouds and no one grabs them, when sensations arise without a narrator assigning meaning, and in those moments, something strange and quiet appears. Not an identity, not a voice, just presence, still, open, aware. So what if you're not the thinker, but the space the thinking happens in? Not the self, but the illusion of one. A dream of continuity wrapped around flickers of awareness. And if you are the illusion, what is watching it unfold? Do you think or observe? Thoughts move through your mind like wind through trees, rustling, shifting, disappearing before you can catch them. You tell yourself you're the one thinking, directing, deciding. But sometimes it feels more like thoughts arrive uninvited. They begin without your permission and end without your control. So what part of you is really in charge? You say, I think. But what if it's more accurate to say, thinking happens, like rain falling, like breathing, a function, not a command. Thoughts emerge, link to one another, and spiral into belief. And only afterward do you say, I thought that. The self appears to claim ownership after the fact. Yet something in you knows this is happening. Some part of you notices the thought arise, notices the reaction it creates, and notices your identification with it. That noticing feels quiet, but steady. It doesn't push or pull. It doesn't offer advice. It simply sees. This is where the line between thinker and observer begins to blur. The thinker judges, narrates, plans, and analyzes. The observer watches all of it without comment. It doesn't need to do anything. It just is. While the thinker fills space with noise, the observer holds silence. And when you stop identifying with the thoughts and rest in that silence, something begins to shift. In those moments of stillness, the internal chatter softens. You realize most thoughts repeat. They're habits, loops. They carry the same tone, the same fears, the same hopes, wearing different costumes, and yet the observer remains the same. It doesn't age. It doesn't argue. It doesn't seem interested in winning or proving. It simply watches the stream of thought like someone standing on the bank of a river. This doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means you stop believing that every thought is yours, or that every thought is true. It means seeing thinking as something that happens within awareness, not as the core of who you are. And once you begin to live from that place, watching rather than chasing, you experience a strange kind of freedom. The mind still moves, but it no longer drags you behind it. The voice still speaks, but you don't have to answer. So do you think, or do you observe? Perhaps the better question is, when thinking quiets, who remains? And if you can hear your own mind speak, what is it that's listening? Are you running out of time? You glance at the clock without thinking. A flicker of movement. Another minute gone. Somewhere in your chest, it lands a quiet pressure, barely noticeable, but it builds. You were just a child. Then a teenager. Then someone trying to catch up to their own life. Years pass like scenery outside a train window, and you wonder if you were ever really present for any of it. Not just because it moved fast, but because you were always focused on what was next. Time doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't pause because you're uncertain. It moves forward, indifferent, unstoppable, silent. And yet somehow, it's the very thing we measure our lives by. We say, I'll be happy when, I'll slow down later. There's still time, but we don't know that. And somewhere deep inside, we do know. We feel it. The ticking isn't on the wall. It's in our bones. You may think you have time because you're young, or because the calendar says there's space, but the calendar doesn't know when the last page arrives. Neither do you. We plan as though life is a promise, not a privilege. We act as though we can outrun regret by staying busy. But every distraction is time you don't get back. We talk about wasting time, but the real loss isn't idleness. It's forgetting to live. It's being so absorbed in the motion of life that you forget its meaning. You meet people and don't really see them. You say words you don't really feel. You chase goals without asking who you're becoming in the process. And then one day, the urgency catches up to you. Not in a crisis, but in a moment of stillness. You sit with a memory and realize it's already too far away to touch. You think about someone you love and feel the edges of absence begin to form. You sense the future shortening, not expanding. It's not about how much time you have, it's about how easily it slips through fingers that aren't paying attention. About how you can live a whole decade and barely feel a month of it. So are you running out of time? Or are you just starting to notice how little of it you've truly held? And if that's true, then maybe the real question isn't when time runs out, but whether this moment will ever return at all. What if this moment won't return? You're here right now, listening to these words, breathing, thinking, feeling. But are you actually in this moment? Or are you already somewhere else, planning, regretting, remembering, waiting? We spend most of our lives in moments that have either passed or haven't arrived. And while we drift between the then and the someday, the now slips by unnoticed. Every moment we live is both ordinary and unrepeatable, the shape of light on the wall, the exact rhythm of your heartbeat. The particular feeling of being who you are in this instant. It won't happen again. Not quite like this. Not with these thoughts. Not with this version of you. But do you feel it? Or are you too busy narrating it into something else? We take the present for granted because it's so quiet. It doesn't demand attention like the past or promise rewards like the future. It just is. Simple, fleeting. But in that simplicity is everything. Every decision you've ever made. Every love you've ever felt. Every version of your life has unfolded, second by second, in the present. And yet we miss it. We talk about presence as if it's a luxury, something to practice, a skill to improve. But it's the only place life ever actually happens. Memory is reconstruction. Imagination is guesswork. But this moment, this breath, this blink, this heartbeat is real. And we trade it for illusions every day. Why? Because presence is vulnerable. It asks you to feel things before you explain them, to experience life without the buffer of analysis. It doesn't let you escape into story. It confronts you with what is, not what might be, and that can be terrifying. But if this moment won't return, and none of them do, what are we saving our attention for? What are we waiting to wake up for? One day something small will happen, a scent, a sound, a feeling, and you'll remember a moment you didn't know you were living for the last time. You'll reach for it, but it will already be gone. So what if this moment won't return? What if it's the only one you ever truly had? And what might it mean to finally show up for it, completely, imperfectly, fully, before it becomes a memory you can't get back? Is time erasing or making you? You age without noticing. Not all at once, but quietly. In the lines that appear without permission. In the names you forget. In the way memories begin to feel like stories someone else told you. And in that slow erosion you wonder, am I becoming more of who I am or slowly vanishing from who I used to be? Time gives us shape. Childhood becomes adolescence. Pain becomes strength. Mistakes become lessons. We learn. We grow. We adapt. And yet with every passing year, we also lose something, not just skin or energy or the illusion of immortality, but versions of ourselves. Rooms we no longer walk through, friends we no longer call, people we used to be but can no longer find. You can look at old photos and feel a strange distance. That smile is yours, but not entirely. That person believed things you've outgrown, feared things you've since survived, loved people who are no longer here. Are they still you, or did time wash them away? Some say we're shaped like stone, carved slowly by the winds of experience. Others say we're more like sand, fluid, reforming with every shift in the tide. But either way, time is the force that shapes us, whether we resist it or not. We can't hold on to any one version for long. The moment you try, it slips through your hands. But maybe that's not loss. Maybe it's transformation. Maybe time doesn't just take, it gives. It reveals who you are beneath what you clung to. It burns away illusion. It teaches you to let go, not as a punishment, but as preparation for something deeper. Still, we mourn. We feel the quiet grief of lives we didn't live, of selves we'll never return to. And that grief is real. It's the cost of movement, the price of passage. You cannot become without leaving something behind. Maybe it's doing both. And maybe that tension is where meaning lives, not in what we hold on to, but in how we change. Not in staying the same, but in learning how to disappear with grace. So, is time erasing you? Or making you? Is it carving away what's unnecessary? Or is it slowly dissolving the edges until nothing is left? And as you change and forget and shed, something waits at the edge of the future, wondering who you'll become when all the versions of you are finally gone. Do you fear your future self? You picture an older version of yourself. Maybe they're wiser. Maybe they've accomplished more. Maybe they've finally figured out the answers that feel so far away today. But look closer. Do you trust them? Do you even want to become them? We talk about the future as if it's a place we're walking toward, but it's also a person we're becoming. And the truth is, that person might not be who we expect. They might have different dreams, different values. They might be shaped by losses you haven't met yet, by joys you never saw coming, by regrets still gathering on the horizon. Sometimes we fear the future not because it's unknown, but because we sense how much we'll have to change to meet it. You work so hard to build a life, to make choices that reflect who you are now. But the you who arrives in 5 years may look back and question everything. They may laugh at your worries, or carry your scars, or make peace with things you still rage against. And here's the strange part. You'll never fully meet this person. You'll never know them the way you know who you've been. The future self is always receding, like the horizon, always out of reach, and yet every moment you become more like them. What if they're lonelier? What if they gave up? What if they settled for less? Or what if they became everything you hoped for, and now you feel unworthy of catching up? We idealize growth, but forget that growth means leaving behind parts of ourselves we've built our identity on. The dreams you've nurtured for years may not survive the next season of your life. The beliefs that once guided you may become burdens. The people you can't imagine living without may only be chapters. So yes, the future self is a stranger, and sometimes they are terrifying, because they remind you that nothing is fixed, that the person you are now is temporary, that every part of your life, your thoughts, your body, your values, is already in motion. But maybe that fear is also an invitation, not to resist the future, but to meet it with curiosity, to wonder not just who you'll become, but what kind of relationship you want to have with that person. Will you resent them or forgive them? Will you mourn who you were or thank yourself for being brave enough to change? Because the only way to meet your future self is to keep walking toward them, with your eyes open. When did you stop being young? Not the day you turned a certain age. Not when your back began to ache, or when a birthday card made you feel ancient. Not even when someone called you sir or ma'am, and meant it. It happened slowly, quietly. So quietly you didn't notice. One day, the music didn't feel like it was for you anymore. The slang felt foreign. The weekends felt shorter, and the risks you used to take without thinking suddenly needed reasons. You looked around and realized youth had become something you used to have, not something you still were. But what does that even mean? We associate youth with energy, beauty, possibility. But maybe what we're really talking about is time. Youth isn't just how your body feels. It's how open the road ahead looks, how far away the end still seems. Youth is permission to try and fail, to dream without shame, to begin again. And when that permission begins to fade, you start asking questions you didn't used to ask. Is it too late? Did I waste it? Am I behind? These aren't the questions of a body aging. They're the questions of a spirit confronting limitation. They signal the shift from infinite potential to lived reality, from what could be to what is. And that shift can feel like a loss, even when your life is full. But maybe the question isn't when you stopped being young. Maybe the question is when you stopped believing that becoming was still possible, that new beginnings could still happen, that risk was still worth taking. You never feel young while you're young, only after. It's always something you realize in hindsight, like a place you wish you'd walked slower through. And that hindsight becomes a kind of longing, not for your body, but for your courage, your willingness to try before you knew what was at stake. So when did you stop being young? Was it a moment, a loss, a choice? Or was it just the slow fading of wonder under the weight of becoming someone the world would take seriously? And if youth is more about openness than age, more about wonder than skin, then maybe you haven't lost it at all. Maybe it's just waiting for you to remember how to begin again. Are you aging or changing? You catch your reflection and pause. Something about your face looks different. Not worse, just unfamiliar. You notice the way you speak has shifted. The things you care about have deepened. The pace of your life has slowed in subtle ways. And you wonder, is this aging or something else? We're told aging is decline, a slow unraveling, a steady march toward less. But what if it's not about losing youth, but about becoming someone new? What if aging isn't a breaking down, but a breaking open? You're not who you were 10 years ago. Your thoughts are slower, but sharper. Your dreams have softened, but they sit closer to the core. You don't bounce back the same way, but you fall less often. The fires that once drove you have cooled, but they've made space for warmth. Maybe what we call aging is just a shift in rhythm, a rebalancing. The early years are spent collecting experiences, ideas, people. Later years are about refining, letting go of the noise, focusing on what matters. You move from expansion to depth, and there's a kind of peace in that, a confidence born not from certainty, but from having endured enough to know what truly deserves your energy. And yet, we resist it because we've been taught to fear it, to fight time like it's an enemy, to preserve, to freeze, to deny. But denial doesn't stop time. It just keeps you from learning what it has to teach. You miss the quiet wisdom that aging offers when you're too busy trying to outrun it. When a tree loses its leaves, we don't call it decay. We call it a season, and we trust that something unseen is still unfolding. So why don't we offer ourselves the same grace? What if the shedding isn't loss, but preparation? What if the stillness that follows isn't emptiness, but renewal? The body changes. That's inevitable. But the question is whether your soul is keeping up. Are you allowing yourself to grow into new questions, new priorities, new kinds of courage? Or are you clinging to who you were, afraid that letting go means vanishing? You are aging, yes, but you are also evolving, becoming, changing in ways that aren't visible in the mirror. You are softening and sharpening at the same time, shedding and expanding. And while age counts the years, change measures something more important, who you're becoming in the time you're given. So are you aging or changing? And what if the answer is both, and the real challenge is learning how to love who you're becoming as deeply as you once mourned who you were? Why does change feel like death? You make a decision. You leave a place. You outgrow a relationship, a belief, a version of yourself that once felt like home. And even when it's right, even when it's necessary, something inside you grieves, something whispers. You've lost something real. But why does growth carry the same ache as loss? Change isn't just about what's coming next, it's also about what can never come back. Every step forward is a quiet farewell to the way things were, and sometimes the farewell feels like death. Not a dramatic ending, but a soft vanishing, the kind that leaves you wondering whether the person you were still exists somewhere inside you. We like to celebrate change as transformation, rebirth, progress, but it also means letting go of what's familiar, safe, known, the job you outgrew, the friend who faded, the certainty you once clung to. Even joy can bring grief when it replaces something you've held for too long. The problem isn't that we change. The problem is that we resist the funeral. We pretend nothing is dying. We move forward without mourning. And the grief gets buried under busyness, under new goals, under forced optimism. But the body remembers. The heart remembers. And when we don't make space to say goodbye, we carry ghosts. Every transformation requires a death, not just of circumstance, but of identity. You don't just leave a chapter, you leave the version of yourself who lived there. You don't just heal, you become someone who no longer needs the wound, and that shift can be disorienting. Who are you, if not who you've always been? But death doesn't only mean disappearance, it also means release. It makes room. It clears the soil. When something falls away, it invites you to discover who you are without it. Not because the past was a mistake, but because it has finished what it came to do. We speak of change like it's a choice, but often it's something that arrives uninvited. A loss, a shift, a truth that can no longer be ignored. You don't get to prepare, you only get to respond. And in that response, something within you is asked to die, so something else might begin. Grief is not the enemy of change. It's the companion, the teacher, the quiet acknowledgement that something mattered, that it shaped you, that it cannot come with you into what comes next. And honoring that loss is part of honoring yourself. So yes, change feels like death, because something is ending, but something else is being born too, quietly, cautiously, in the space that was made by your courage to let go. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it begin to breathe, even as it says goodbye. What if nothing lasts? We build so much on the promise of permanence. Relationships, careers, identities, routines. We plant roots, we make plans. We tell ourselves that some things will stay, that some people will never leave, that we can count on the ground beneath us to stay solid. But what if none of it lasts? What if impermanence isn't the exception? It's the rule. We don't always notice it in the moment. The way a friendship fades, not with a fight, but with distance. The way a belief softens, not with revelation, but with quiet erosion. The way the person you used to be stops showing up. The way a home becomes a memory. You don't choose these endings. They happen, and the world does not ask your permission. It's comforting to think some things can be held, that love, once found, will stay. That meaning, once created, will remain. That joy, once felt, will return on demand. But life keeps moving. Even stone wears down. Even truth evolves. Even memory forgets. This isn't about despair. It's about honesty, about seeing clearly. Because once you realize that nothing lasts, not the pain, not the ecstasy, not even the things you most cherish, you start to pay attention differently. You stop gripping so tightly. You stop postponing your presence. You start to listen to what the moment is really saying. We're taught to seek what's permanent. But what if the beauty of something is found in its passing? A sunset is precious because it ends. A touch matters because it won't happen again in quite the same way. Even the breath you're taking now, once exhaled, it's gone. And yet it mattered. It kept you alive. Permanence creates comfort, but impermanence creates depth. It awakens tenderness. It softens the armor. It reminds us that to love anything is to risk losing it, and to do so anyway is what makes us human. So what if nothing lasts? Then everything you hold becomes more valuable, not less. Every word spoken, every glance shared, every day survived becomes sacred, not because it's yours forever, but because you were present for it just once in a world that guarantees nothing. And maybe the courage to live fully is born not from what stays, but from what's already slipping away. Are you stuck in a memory loop? You think of something that happened years ago, maybe a moment of pain, maybe a feeling of shame, a conversation you wish you'd handled differently. It rises in your mind like it just happened, and your body responds. The heart rate shifts, the breath tightens. You're there again, not in memory, but in experience. Why does the past still feel so alive? We assume time moves forward, that the past is behind us, out of reach. But memory doesn't follow that logic. It loops, it repeats, it arrives without warning, and it doesn't just show you what happened, it makes you feel like it's still happening. The body can't always tell the difference between remembering and reliving. Maybe it's just a glitch. Maybe it's your mind trying to process what it never fully understood. Or maybe it's something deeper. Maybe some part of you never left that moment. A version of you is still standing there, waiting for an apology that never came, still asking a question that never got answered, still carrying something that never found a place to set it down. You don't need to choose the memory for it to choose you, and the more it repeats, the more it wires itself into your sense of self. It becomes not just something you remember, but something you are. The wound folds itself into your story. The loop becomes a script. You start living according to what happened rather than what's happening. But memory isn't a perfect record. It's a storyteller. It edits, it dramatizes. It fills in blanks with emotion, and sometimes the story it keeps telling is one that no longer serves you, not because it's false, but because you've changed. And the story hasn't. You think you're stuck in the past, but maybe the past is stuck in you. So are you in control of your memory, or is it in control of you? Are you revisiting, or are you rehearsing? Are you healing, or are you replaying pain because it feels familiar? Sometimes, to step out of the loop, you don't need to forget. You need to look at the memory with new eyes, see who you were and who you no longer are. Feel the ache, but refuse to let it write your next sentence. Because the memory isn't you, the loop isn't the life, and the past only echoes as long as you keep answering. Is time pulling you apart? You remember who you used to be, not just as a fact, but as a feeling, a texture, a different tone of voice, a different kind of hunger. The way you once moved through the world with certainty or recklessness or wonder, and then you compare that to who you are now, and something doesn't quite align. You've changed. Of course you have. But the change doesn't always feel like growth. Sometimes it feels like fragmentation. Like you've left behind versions of yourself in places you no longer visit, people you no longer speak to, choices you no longer understand. Like your past and present selves are strangers passing each other in the hallway. So what holds you together? Time promises continuity, but it also creates distance between who you were and who you are, between what you wanted and what you settled for, between the person you show to others and the one you speak to in the dark, and that distance can stretch you thin. We like to think of life as a journey, a line, a progression, but sometimes it feels more like a scattering, a collection of disconnected chapters, each written by a slightly different hand. You look back and see someone with your name, your face, your memories, but not your heart, not your voice. And still, that version of you shaped this one. Their pain is still in your breath. Their joy still flickers in your smile. Their fear still echoes in your choices. You didn't outgrow them. You absorbed them. But sometimes, the pieces don't quite fit anymore. Like you're a collage stitched together by time, unsure which parts to keep and which to let dissolve. You are not a single self. You never were. You are layers, overlapping, Timelines bleeding into one another. Decisions made by people you no longer are. Dreams chased by someone you barely remember. And through it all, you keep moving forward, dragging every past version with you, hoping the next version will make sense of it all. So is time pulling you apart? Or is it showing you that wholeness was never about consistency, but about learning how to hold your contradictions without needing them to match? Because maybe what you're becoming isn't a cleaner story, but a deeper one. What if you mean nothing? You look up at the night sky and feel something shift. The stars are distant, cold, ancient. Galaxies swirl in silence, light traveling for millions of years just to meet your eyes. And you think, what am I really? A flicker, a breath, a single thought in the span of an indifferent cosmos. We tell ourselves that we matter, that our choices ripple outward, that our lives are stories with purpose. But when you stand before that endless black, all your triumphs and tragedies seem to shrink. The universe doesn't notice your heartbreak. The stars won't change course because of your dreams. The silence up there doesn't answer back. And that silence can be terrifying. Because if you don't matter, if all of this is just temporary biological motion, then what are you doing here? Why care? Why try? Why get up and keep moving through a life that will disappear just as surely as the millions that came before it? Some people search for meaning in God, in love, in legacy. Others build it through art, connection, kindness. But under all of it, there's a deeper question. Are we creating meaning to mask the void, or is that creation the meaning itself? Is significance something to be found, or something we invent to bear the weight of being alive? The thought that you mean nothing can feel like falling. But maybe it's also freedom. Maybe if there's no cosmic plan, no fixed destiny, no eternal scoreboard, then everything you do is radically your own. Every kindness becomes sacred, every breath a choice, every connection a miracle of chance and courage. Meaning doesn't have to be large to be real. It doesn't have to last forever to matter. It can be fleeting and still shape the entire atmosphere of a moment. Still, the fear remains that someday you'll vanish. Your memories, your name, your photos, your voice, gone, and the world will keep spinning. And the stars will keep burning, and no one will remember what you loved or what you lost. The universe will not mourn you. It will not notice your silence. But maybe the point isn't to be remembered forever. Maybe the point is to be fully here while you're here, to feel the weight of your smallness and still choose to speak, to care, to reach. Because if nothing is guaranteed, then everything is sacred. If nothing lasts, then every fragile moment becomes holy in its urgency. So what if you mean nothing? Then what you do today means everything. Because even the smallest act of kindness in a world that may forget you becomes a defiant and beautiful declaration that you were here. Can meaning survive infinity? We search for meaning like it's something we can carve into stone, something fixed, timeless, immune to the chaos of the world. We build religions around it, philosophies, nations. We frame our lives around causes and beliefs that promise something lasting. But then we consider infinity. Time without end, space without center, a universe where stars die and new ones are born before their light ever reaches us. A scale so vast that our entire species, our cities, our art, our tragedies becomes a brief flare in an endless dark. And suddenly, meaning feels fragile, as if no matter how deeply we believe in something, time will erode it. The names will fade. The stories will be lost. Even the sun will burn out. Even the most enduring monuments will crumble. The memory of memory itself will dissolve. So can meaning survive infinity? Or does infinity crush everything into silence? We try to anchor meaning in permanence, but maybe that's the mistake. Maybe meaning doesn't need to last forever to matter. Maybe it's not diminished by time, but defined by it. The fact that something ends makes it more urgent, not less. The sunset means something because it fades. A song is beautiful because it ends. A life is sacred because it doesn't last. Infinity doesn't erase meaning. It reframes it. It asks you to let go of the fantasy that anything you build will endure unchanged, and instead to recognize that meaning lives in moments, in what you give your attention to, in the choices you make when no one is watching, in the love you offer that may never be returned. If the universe is infinite, then every action becomes a kind of rebellion. To care, to create, to hope in the face of inevitable dissolution. These are not signs of delusion. They are signs of courage, of awareness, of a consciousness that knows its place and still insists on beauty. Still, there's a grief that lingers, that even your greatest act of kindness might vanish, that your deepest connection may not be remembered, that every meaning you build could one day be swallowed by silence. But maybe it isn't about surviving infinity at all. Maybe meaning isn't a monument, it's a flicker of light in the dark. And maybe it matters because it flickers, not in spite of it. So maybe the question isn't whether meaning can survive infinity. Maybe the question is whether you can hold meaning while knowing it won't last forever. And maybe, just maybe, that's the very thing that makes it real. Are you a mistake that thinks? You are made of accidents, carbon from exploded stars, DNA stitched together by chance, a brain sculpted by pressures you didn't choose. You didn't decide to be born. You didn't design the wiring that makes you anxious or curious or kind. And yet here you are, thinking, questioning, asking if you should even exist. Evolution doesn't aim for meaning. It aims for survival. Your mind is a tool shaped by need, not purpose, a pattern-seeking machine, a narrative generator, a consciousness caught in a feedback loop, aware enough to wonder why, but not built to find the answer. So what if you're just an error, a rare glitch in a vast, indifferent system? The universe doesn't require you to be here, and it certainly doesn't explain itself. It spins and collapses and expands again, whether or not you exist to watch it. This thought can feel hollow, even cruel, that everything you feel and believe might be the unintended byproduct of a blind process, that your ability to love is a chemical trick, that your questions don't point to meaning, just to malfunction. Intelligence as a fluke, awareness as an accident, wonder as a glitch, meaning as a side effect. But maybe there's another way to see it. What if the mistake is beautiful? What if the fact that randomness led to music, to laughter, to tenderness, that this wasn't part of the plan, makes it more miraculous, not less? What if your questions are the poetry of a universe that didn't intend to speak, but somehow found its voice in you? What if awareness was never meant to happen, and that's exactly why it matters? Because it wasn't programmed. It wasn't predicted. It rose out of chaos, like a flower through concrete. Unexpected, fragile, alive. You weren't asked to exist, but you do. You weren't designed to feel awe, but you do. You weren't promised purpose, but you seek it anyway. And maybe that seeking, that ache to understand, isn't a flaw in the system. Maybe it's the system waking up. Maybe the miracle isn't that the universe made sense, but that something inside it began to wonder whether it could. So are you a mistake that thinks? Or are you thought itself rising unexpectedly out of the dark? Not because it had to, but because it could. And in that uninvited flicker of awareness, maybe the universe glimpsed something it never meant to create. Is the universe watching you fade? You wake up one morning and notice the light falling differently across the wall. The air feels older. The mirror reflects someone familiar, but not entirely the same. You've changed, but slowly. So slowly, in fact, that you didn't realize it was happening. And you wonder, quietly, if anyone noticed. The world moves fast. People pass each other like shadows. Time erases more than it leaves behind. And as the days fold into months and years, a part of you begins to feel invisible, not just to others, but even to yourself. You used to be more vivid, more certain, more seen. But now? Now you wonder if you've begun to fade. You search for signs that you still matter. Not in the grand dramatic sense, but in the quiet grounding way. A voice remembering your name, a touch that lingers a little longer, a place where you're still expected. But the universe offers no reply. The stars continue their slow burn. The planets orbit without pause. The cosmos doesn't stop to acknowledge your presence, and the silence is both humbling and crushing. Is the universe watching you fade, or has it never been watching at all? There's a loneliness that comes with being a thinking creature in an unthinking universe. You can feel so deeply, hurt so easily, hope so intensely, and still be surrounded by vast, indifferent silence. You call out, not for answers, but for recognition. Just something to say, yes, I see you. You're here, but the echo never comes. So, you begin to wonder, maybe fading is part of the design. Maybe no one gets to remain fully seen forever. Maybe every life is a slow vanishing. One breath at a time. Not because we're unimportant, but because change itself is woven into the fabric of being. Nothing stays bright forever. Not stars. Not people. Not even the feelings we think will never leave. And yet, there's something in you that resists this. Something small and persistent. Something that insists on witnessing. Maybe that's what awareness is, a refusal to let the moment pass unacknowledged. Maybe you are not fading. Maybe you are observing. And in that observation, something is preserved. The universe may not see you, but you see it. You feel it. You name it. You give it meaning. And in doing so, you leave a trace. Not in the stars, but in the fragile, fleeting miracle of your experience. So if you are fading, fade like light at dusk. Not vanishing, just changing shape. How small will you let yourself feel? You stand beneath a sky too large to hold in your mind. Galaxies spin in silence. Planets orbit suns you'll never see. Somewhere, light from stars already dead travels across a void so vast it makes every human measurement feel absurd. And in that moment, you feel it, not fear, not awe, but smallness, real, undeniable, humbling smallness. We are taught to be important, to make our mark, to leave a legacy, to grow, to build, to conquer. But beneath that cultural current runs another truth, one that doesn't ask to be loud. It whispers through quiet places. You are small, and it is okay. Not meaningless. Not irrelevant, just small. A moment within a moment. A single breath in an endless wind. And the question isn't whether that smallness is real. It's whether you'll allow yourself to feel it without rushing to escape. Because smallness is uncomfortable. We fight it. We reach for control, for certainty, for declarations of who we are. We inflate our roles, our plans, our opinions, hoping that importance will protect us from how temporary everything feels. But importance is a costume, and smallness is the naked truth. So how small will you let yourself feel? Will you stand in the quiet and not flinch? Will you admit that everything you fear, everything you cling to, everything you build will pass? Will you allow yourself to be reduced by that thought or refined by it? Some people run from smallness. They bury it beneath ambition. Others romanticize it, mistaking surrender for apathy. But smallness isn't despair. It's recognition of scale, of time, of your place in a universe that owes you nothing and still gave you everything. To feel small is to remember that your worries are not the whole sky, that your failures are not cosmic events, that your pain, while real, is not all that is. And strangely, this is where peace begins, not in control, but in perspective. Not in having power, but in knowing you never needed it to belong. So how small will you let yourself feel? Small enough to walk unnoticed through the world and still feel connected to it. Small enough to witness beauty and not need to claim it. Small enough to be forgotten and still give without needing thanks. Small enough to disappear into the vastness of time and still trust your life has meaning. Would stars notice you gone? You come and go. You breathe, love, struggle, grow. And one day you will vanish, not suddenly perhaps, but gradually. Your voice will go quiet in someone's memory. Your name will fade from conversations. The outline of your life will soften until only photographs remain. And eventually those too will be forgotten. Would anything in the vast machinery of existence even flinch? We like to think we matter, that our lives leave ripples, that someone, somewhere, something will notice when we're gone. But when you look at the stars, burning in silence for billions of years, indifferent to the chaos on Earth, it's hard not to wonder. Would they miss you? Would the constellations realign? Would gravity shift slightly in your absence? Or would everything continue exactly as before because the cosmos never knew you were here to begin with? This thought can feel unbearable. The idea that the universe doesn't notice, doesn't grieve, doesn't register your existence, that you are not a part of some grand attentive order, but a momentary flicker in a system too immense to care. And yet, there's something deeply human in asking the question at all. Because it means you want to be noticed, not by stars, but by something, by someone. You want your presence to mean something, if only in the quiet way a hand means something when it reaches for another. You want to know that this life was not a whisper lost in wind, but something heard, however briefly. And maybe that's the point. Stars don't need to notice you. They are not the audience. You are. You are the one who looks up and feels awe. You are the one who gives the night sky its meaning, its story, its sorrow. You are the consciousness that names the constellations. You are the witness. Maybe the tragedy isn't that the universe won't notice you're gone. Maybe it's that you noticed it while you were here and it never spoke back. But you did. You gave it poetry. You gave it silence that meant something. You gave it longing. The stars may never know your name, but they lived in your gaze. They existed in your metaphors. They danced in your dreams. Would the stars notice you gone? No, but maybe the stars only shine because someone was here to see them, and maybe they never meant anything until you gave them meaning. And maybe in the final flicker of your life, the fact that you noticed them, that you wondered at all, was the closest the universe ever came to knowing itself. And maybe that someone was you. Is the void listening? You speak into the silence, not out loud, always, but with your life. Every time you love, every time you grieve, every time you wonder whether anything you do matters. Each of these is a message cast into space, not for someone else, but for whatever might be out there, something, anything. You don't even know what you hope will answer. You just hope something is listening. Maybe that's why people pray. Not necessarily to a God with a name or a face, but to the unknown, to the silence itself. Not because they expect a reply, but because the alternative, that there is no one and nothing on the other end, is too much to bear. We call it the void, a place of absence, a presence of absence, and still we whisper to it. You may have done this without realizing, looked up at the ceiling in the dark and thought, "Are you there?" Not knowing who you is, not even sure you believe in anything at all, and yet the question still comes. It's not logic, it's not ritual, it's a reaching. But if the void is listening, what does it hear? Not your words, exactly, but your ache, your longing. The way you exist despite knowing that everything ends. The way you create meaning in a universe that offers none by default. Maybe that's what the void receives. Not content, but courage. The courage to be conscious in a reality that may never acknowledge you back. And yet, the silence persists. No message has ever come down from the stars. No voice has ever emerged from the dark to say, "I see you." Maybe the void is not a presence but a mirror. Maybe it echoes your questions without ever offering answers. Maybe it listens by letting you speak. That might sound cruel, but it might also be the greatest form of respect, to let you shape your own meaning, to leave the space wide open for you to decide what matters. Maybe the void doesn't reply because the reply is already happening. In you, in the asking, in the reaching. So is the void listening. Maybe, maybe not. But the fact that you ask, the fact that you wonder, the fact that you speak into the silence anyway, that might be all the answer you'll ever need. And maybe, just maybe, the void exists so that someone like you could speak at all. Are you just a fleeting spark? There was a moment, perhaps even today, when you felt it, a sudden clarity, a brief pulse of aliveness, like something in you lit up and the world sharpened. A laugh that echoed deeper than expected, a quiet sunrise that caught your breath, a moment of pain that felt too big to carry but too honest to ignore. These are sparks, brief, bright, gone. And then, the day continues. The light fades. The pulse quiets. You return to tasks, to routines, to the silent churn of time. And you wonder, was that glimpse of something more real, or was it just a flicker? Are you just a spark? We want to be more than moments. We want continuity, permanence, something that lasts. We imagine the soul as an ember that doesn't go out. But what if you're not a slow-burning flame? What if you are a flash? What if your life, however full, is just a single burst in the dark? In the cosmic scale, it's hard to argue otherwise. 13 billion years of history, and your span, however long, barely registers. You appear, you glow, you vanish, and the universe, unbothered, moves on. It doesn't even pause to watch you burn. The silence between stars does not bend to acknowledge you. It holds your brilliance only as long as you can radiate it. But maybe that's not the failure. Maybe that's the beauty. A spark is small, yes, but in its brief light, everything around it changes. It makes darkness visible. It marks a moment as unmistakably alive. It exists with intensity, not permanence. And maybe that's what makes it precious. You don't get to control how long the spark lasts, but you do get to choose how fully it burns while it's here, how honestly it flickers, how fiercely it refuses to go unnoticed. You can't stop your impermanence, but you can stop pretending it makes you weak. Maybe the shortness of life is not a tragedy. Maybe it's the very thing that makes presence possible. You don't burn forever, but you burn now. And now is the only place anything has ever truly lived. To be a spark is to be fleeting, but also undeniable. It is to be brief, but vivid. To live as proof that even in a cold, vast universe, something once flared awake, and if you are a spark, you are not alone. The world is full of tiny flames, each lighting something in someone else before they go. Are you just a fleeting spark? Yes. And still, you warm the air, you light the dark, you change the space around you. And when you're gone, something lingers. Not the spark itself, but the mark it left behind. A brief fire, a moment of light, a reason for someone else to look up and remember that sparks exist. Why does infinity feel cold? Infinity should be awe-inspiring, boundless, full of possibility. But when you sit with the idea too long, it begins to feel different. Not vast, but empty. Not hopeful, but indifferent. Like a hall with no end, no echo, no door. You imagine time without edge, space without center, and instead of wonder, you feel a quiet chill creeping in. The kind that doesn't sting immediately, but settles into the background, like a room that will never warm no matter how long you stay. Why does infinity feel cold? Because it erases the frame, and without a frame, meaning slips away. In infinity, everything loses its urgency. Love loses its chance to be rare. Choices lose their weight. Suffering has no context. The stories we tell of struggle, triumph, change begin to blur, then vanish. If everything continues forever, what difference does anything make? Where is the spark if the fire has no edge? How can a moment matter if there are no ends to define it? Our lives are defined by limits. Time gives shape to value. The end gives meaning to the middle. Death gives meaning to life. We hold on to these boundaries not because we like them, but because they help us know who we are. Infinity offers no such help. It gives us everything, and in doing so, seems to leave us with nothing we can hold. Without limits, joy can flatten into monotony. Without risk, love loses its shine. Without death, what would we dare to cherish? And then there's the silence. Infinity doesn't speak. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't answer the questions you ask in the dark. It just stretches further and further until even your thoughts sound small inside it. It's not just the scale. It's the loneliness. To be aware, conscious, searching, and hear no reply. Infinity is not hostile, but it is utterly impersonal. It's a cathedral with no voice, a stage with no audience. And still, something in you wants to make contact. You want to find warmth in the cold, meaning in the endless, not because you think you'll solve infinity, but because you want to feel something within it. You want your breath to matter, your love to matter, your time to leave even a faint mark on the unmappable. Not to conquer it, but to light a single torch in the dark and call that flame your own. Infinity feels cold because it doesn't care. But maybe that's what makes your caring significant. The universe may not be aware, but you are. It may not create meaning, but you do. It may be infinite, but your life isn't. And maybe that contrast is what makes being alive so startling. Maybe the warmth you create isn't meant to endure forever. Maybe it's enough that it existed at all. You live where the boundary is, where warmth rises, briefly, against the cold, where something finite looks into the face of the infinite and chooses to love it anyway. And maybe that warmth is enough. Can silence be a response? You ask a question, you wait, and there is no reply. Not a word, not a gesture, just silence. And yet the silence does something. It says something. Or maybe it refuses to say anything at all, and that refusal becomes its own answer. Silence unnerves us. We fill it with apologies, with explanations, with noise. We fear what it might mean. Disinterest, dismissal, rejection. But what if silence isn't an absence? What if it's a form of presence too subtle to be loud? We imagine answers as words, clarity, structure, something we can hold and repeat. But not all truths fit into language. Not all feelings survive translation. Some things live too deep for speech, and when they rise, they do so quietly. Grief, wonder, shame, reverence. Even love, real love, can arrive with no words at all. Can silence be a response? Yes, it can be the deepest one. Sometimes silence is a mirror. It reflects back what you brought into it. Ask a question in anger, and silence will feel like defiance. Ask in grief, and it feels like compassion. Ask in desperation, and it might feel like abandonment. The silence didn't change, but you did. Sometimes silence is protection. It holds what words would ruin. It shelters meaning, instead of exposing it. It gives time, space, a breath that no explanation can match. In moments of pain, words can reduce, but silence listens. And sometimes being listened to fully, quietly, is the most sacred form of understanding. Other times, silence challenges you. It asks whether your question was real, whether it was rooted in curiosity or in a demand. It does not perform for you. It doesn't always reward the loudest voice. It waits for you to change your shape, not to find the answer, but to become someone who can live without one. And perhaps that's what silence does best. It gives back nothing, so you are forced to bring everything. It doesn't steer the conversation. It becomes the space where your own voice either breaks or reveals itself. You meet yourself in the silence. And what you find there may not be comfortable, but it is almost always honest. So yes, silence can be a response. One that speaks without sound. One that reveals without explanation. One that tells you the answer was never outside of you at all. And when it lingers long enough, it might not be silence anymore. It might be truth. Can you ever be truly known? You spend your life trying to show who you are, through words, through choices, through fragments of memory and stories shared like breadcrumbs. But no matter how much you reveal, there's always something missing, something no one else quite sees. You are a storm of contradictions. What you feel and what you say, what you think and what you do, what you mean and what others hear. And in that gap, the self becomes slippery. You try to explain, to clarify, to be understood, but even your best efforts fall short. You are translated through other people's fears, hopes, projections, and something essential is always lost in the process. So can you ever be truly known? You change from moment to moment. The person you are today may not match the one they remember from last year. You are layered, shifting, complex. Even you struggle to fully understand yourself. How could someone else capture what you haven't yet named? We think of intimacy as merging, total exposure, the illusion that someone could reach into your mind and see it all. But minds don't work that way. They're not transparent. They're oceans, deep, with undercurrents even you haven't mapped. To be known isn't to be fully seen. It's to be held even in your mystery. Sometimes you don't want to be known. Not really. You want to be accepted. You want to be loved. You want to be safe. You want to show only the parts that feel beautiful or strong or understandable. But true knowing requires more. It asks for the unfinished parts, the contradictions, the fears that don't make sense, the quiet truths you've never said aloud. It asks for the you that even you are still meeting. And when someone sees even a sliver of that and stays, something rare happens. You are not fully known, but you are felt, recognized, not as a complete idea, but as a presence, as something unfolding. And maybe that's the closest we ever get. Not to be fully known, but to be known enough. To be held without being solved. To be witnessed without being reduced. And maybe in that partial seeing, there's more love than in total understanding. Will anyone remember you right? After you're gone, people will remember you, but not as you were, as they saw you, through their lens, their story, their version of your presence in their lives. It won't be the full you, it will be a silhouette, filled in with fragments of memory and feelings shaped more by them than by the complexity you carried. That can be a hard truth to hold. You work your whole life to become someone, carefully, painfully. You grow. You change. You try to do better. But in someone's memory, you might always remain the person you were when you first met, or the version of you they needed at the time. Or worse, the one moment you failed them. Will anyone remember you right? Not exactly. Not fully, because people remember what touched them, what hurt them, what stayed with them. They remember how you made them feel far more than what you intended. They'll forget your reasons. They'll misquote your words. They'll pass along stories with details reshaped by time. And still, that memory will carry your name. You might try to control it, to shape your legacy, to explain your truth before time gets its hands on it. But memory is wild. It doesn't obey. Even those who love you most will remember you differently, and each version of you will live on as if it were the only one. One moment might define you in their mind. One sentence, taken out of context, might become the thread they pull on for years. You may not even recognize yourself in the version they carry. That's the risk of being known at all. You become part of other people's stories and lose authorship in the process. They cast you in roles you didn't audition for. Hero, villain, ghost. Some remember your best. Others can't forget your worst. And the truth of who you were leaves somewhere in the middle, too complex to hold in a single retelling. And yet, maybe that's not failure. Maybe that's how memory works. Not to preserve the past perfectly, but to keep it alive in a new way. Not as a fact, but as a feeling. You don't live on through accuracy. You live on through the meaning someone attaches to your name, the warmth you left behind, the lesson, the laughter, the change, the ache. No one will remember you right, but they may remember you kindly, or painfully, or as a turning point, a question, a comfort, a complication. And maybe that's more honest than a perfect recollection. Maybe being remembered at all is a kind of miracle, a testament that you once made ripples, even if no one can trace them back exactly to your touch. You will be remembered, but never completely. And in that incomplete remembering, something of you still moves, not as you were, but as you were felt. Is every connection temporary? You meet someone, a spark, a pull, a familiarity that feels older than the moment. You talk, you laugh, you share things you haven't told anyone else. And in that space between you, something grows, a connection, real, electric, unmistakable. And still, somewhere inside, it won't last. Not because you want it to end, but because everything does. People move, priorities shift. Time distorts what once felt clear. Even the strongest bond is vulnerable to silence, to distance, to change. And that knowledge sits there, quietly, beneath the joy. A shadow in the corner of the room. A clock you try not to look at. So is every connection temporary? Maybe. And maybe that's what gives it weight. If we lived forever, if every relationship stretched into eternity, we might take them for granted. We might stop showing up with presence, with effort, with awe. But knowing something can end makes you lean in harder, speak more honestly, listen more deeply, love with more urgency. There's something sacred in knowing that the moment you're living might not come again, that the words you speak could be the last ones heard, that the person across from you may only be passing through. Some connections last longer than others. Some stay with you your whole life. Others are brief, but in their short span, they mark you forever. A stranger who said the exact right thing at the right moment. A friend who held your hand for a chapter, then faded. A lover who taught you how to be seen, even if they couldn't stay to keep seeing you. These connections may not last, but that doesn't make them less real. Their impermanence does not erase their depth. In fact, it sharpens it. We tend to equate permanence with importance, but some of the most transformative moments are fleeting. Some people arrive only to open a door inside you and leave before you fully step through it. Their exit doesn't erase their impact. Their absence doesn't undo the intimacy you shared. A connection doesn't have to stay to matter. It only has to be true while it's here. Maybe the point of connection isn't to last forever. Maybe it's to arrive fully while it's here, to be present enough that it matters, even if it's short, to meet someone in the now and leave them a little different, a little more whole, a little more human. Maybe we're meant to collide, shift each other slightly and move on, like constellations drifting in the dark. So yes, every connection might be temporary, but the echo it leaves, that stays, that hums, that reappears unexpectedly in a thought, a smell, a song, a reminder that you met someone, and it mattered. Do we all die alone? You can be surrounded by love, held by hands that have known you, whispered to by voices that have carried you. But when the final breath comes, it is yours. No one can take it for you. No one can follow you past that threshold. You go alone, not because no one cares, but because no one else can come. And that thought haunts us. The idea that no matter how deeply we are known, how tightly we are held, death remains solitary. That beneath every connection lies an isolation we cannot escape, a curtain that doesn't lift for company. Even the ones who love us most must stop at the edge. We walk those last steps ourselves. Do we all die alone? Yes and no. Yes, because no one else can live your life for you. No one else can carry the full weight of your choices, your memories, your regrets. No one else can feel your final moment from the inside. The end, like the beginning, is something only you experience firsthand. That last breath, that final heartbeat, is yours and yours alone. But no, because you are never made alone. You are shaped by others, by touch, by language, by presence, and even when the body grows still, the echo of every connection you've known still hums in the room. You may cross that final threshold alone, but you carry the fingerprints of every soul that ever reached for you. You carry the voices that taught you to speak, the eyes that saw you, the hands that held you up. We fear dying alone because we confuse presence with witness. We think that to not be seen in our last moment is to vanish into nothing. But maybe the point isn't whether someone watches your final breath. Maybe it's whether you lived a life where you were truly seen before that moment. Maybe what matters is not who stands beside you at the end, but who helped you feel less alone while you were alive. Who gave you space to be exactly who you were without shrinking. Who saw your darkness and didn't flinch. And if love lives on in memory, if your voice lingers in stories, if your kindness leaves a mark that time cannot erase, then maybe you don't vanish at all. Maybe the moment of death is not a severing, but a return. Not isolation, but a release into something larger. Not silence, but a final ripple into the lives you touched. A continuation in the form of how you made others feel, how you changed their path, how you quietly rearranged their world without even knowing. Do we all die alone? In the physical sense, yes. But in every other way that matters, you're not alone at all. You're carried, remembered, felt. And somewhere someone's life is better because you passed through it. Your absence will still speak. Your love will still echo. And maybe that is the opposite of alone. Why is goodbye always waiting? You meet someone. You build something. You find a rhythm, a moment, a place that feels like home. And even as you're in it, laughing, living, breathing, it hovers nearby. The feeling that this won't last, that every hello already contains a goodbye waiting quietly in the wings. Sometimes we say goodbye all at once, a move, a death, a final conversation. Other times, it's slow, a drifting, a soft fade that you only recognize once it's nearly gone, and yet both hurt, both leave a silence shaped like something you once held. Sometimes, it's not even a person we say goodbye to, but a dream, a version of ourselves, a way of being that quietly outgrows the space it lived in. Because time doesn't pause, nothing stays suspended. Every beginning starts moving the moment it begins. Every smile carries the weight of change. Even joy ages. And the more we love, the more we risk losing. It's the cost of attachment. Every bond carries the seed of parting. We try to guard ourselves. We keep some distance. We prepare for the end before it arrives. We try not to hold too tightly, not to sink too deeply. But even that doesn't protect us. Even the things we let go lightly still leave imprints. Even fleeting connections shift us in ways we don't always see until later. There's no such thing as touching without leaving traces. No such thing as loving without some kind of loss. Maybe goodbye waits, because it has to. Because permanence is an illusion we tell ourselves to feel safe. Because if nothing ended, nothing would begin. Maybe goodbye is not an enemy, but a boundary. One that shapes meaning, one that turns a passing moment into memory. Maybe it's what gives the ordinary its glow. The awareness that it won't be here forever is what makes it shimmer while it is. But still, it aches, even when expected, even when chosen, even when the goodbye is gentle and full of love. It's not just the end we mourn, it's the version of ourselves that lived in that time, with that person, in that place. When we say goodbye to someone, we often say goodbye to who we were with them, and that version of us doesn't return. It leaves with the moment, tucked into the folds of memory. And yet, Perhaps that's the gift too, that you got to be that version of yourself at all, that someone else helped shape it, that goodbye only hurts because hello meant something, that the ache is a shadow cast by something real. So why is goodbye always waiting? Because everything real eventually changes, and that's not proof that it didn't matter. It's proof that it did. Are you filling a role? You enter a room, and something shifts, not in the world, but in you. You smile a certain way. You speak with a tone you've used 100 times before. You say what's expected. You become who you think you need to be, and maybe you don't even notice it happening. Maybe it feels natural, comfortable, like slipping into a familiar script. But later, when you're alone, you wonder, was that really me, or just a version I learned to play? We all wear masks. Some are subtle, adjustments, compromises, reflexes. Others are heavy, armor built over years of needing to be safe, liked, needed. Somewhere along the way, the line between the role and the self begins to blur. You become what was once a performance. And the longer you stay in character, the harder it is to remember what came before it. Are you filling a role? In many ways, yes. Life gives us scripts, roles of child, friend, lover, worker, parent. We inherit expectations from family, culture, belief, and some of these roles are useful. They help us navigate the world. They give us language, structure, connection, but they also come with limits. Rules about who you're allowed to be and who you're not. Rules that were never yours, but still feel like law. The danger isn't the role itself. It's when the role becomes a cage, when you forget you're playing it, when you start shrinking yourself to fit inside it, when your silence gets mistaken for politeness, when your discomfort gets buried under being agreeable, when you say yes not because you want to, but because it's what's expected. The performance becomes so polished, even you start to believe it. Sometimes you forget who you are when no one's watching. You forget how your voice sounds when it's not performing. You forget what you believe when it's not being filtered through someone else's approval. The self gets quieter. The role gets louder. Until one day you realize you've spent years perfecting a version of yourself that was never quite yours to begin with. And yet, roles aren't evil. They're part of being human. What matters is whether you can take them off, whether you can sit in your own skin without needing an audience, whether there's a version of you that exists outside of performance, messy, uncertain, real, one that stumbles, contradicts itself, and still deserves to be seen. You will fill roles. That's inevitable, but you don't have to disappear into them. You can choose which ones fit. You can retire the ones that no longer serve you. You can learn to be a little more yourself, even in the presence of expectation. So are you filling a role? Yes, but that doesn't mean you've lost who you are. It just means you're still learning how to return to it. Can you ever truly belong? You walk into a room and feel something, or maybe feel the absence of something, a slight tension, a subtle doubt. You wonder if you're welcome, not just in space, but in essence. You look for signs. Eye contact, body language, the cadence of voices. You measure your place, not by where you stand, but by how people make room for your being. Belonging isn't about proximity. It's about presence, about being seen, not just included but understood, not just invited but embraced. And that kind of belonging is rare, because most of us have been taught to earn it, to perform for it, to shapeshift, so we can fit into spaces that were never built with us in mind. We learn early what parts of ourselves to silence, what truths to soften just to stay within the circle. So, can you ever truly belong? Sometimes we confuse fitting in with belonging. Fitting in is conditional. You match the tone, you mirror the values, you mold your edges to avoid conflict. But deep down, you know if you changed or stopped performing, the welcome might disappear. That's not belonging, that's survival. It's camouflage in emotional form, and it leaves a loneliness that no amount of applause can cure. Belonging begins when you don't have to hide, when your presence isn't a disruption, but a contribution, when your contradictions aren't edited out, but held with curiosity. True belonging doesn't flatten you. It makes space for your shape, whole, shifting, unresolved. It lets your silence speak and your chaos breathe. But that space is hard to find, and sometimes it must be built. Because for many, the world offers no effortless welcome. Belonging becomes a kind of resistance, a declaration that you deserve to exist as you are, not as someone else prefers you to be. It's an act of courage to stay when you feel invisible. And it's also an act of love to leave spaces that ask you to shrink. Leaving isn't failure. It's a form of self-respect, a way of saying, I believe I can be known elsewhere. You might not always belong everywhere, but that doesn't mean you belong nowhere. Sometimes belonging isn't found, it's grown. In one honest friendship, in one quiet moment where you feel fully yourself, in the language you use to describe your inner world, in the stillness of knowing you no longer need to explain. Belonging doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's as soft as being able to breathe without apology. Can you ever truly belong? Yes. But maybe not all at once. Not everywhere. Not forever. Belonging isn't a destination, it's a rhythm. A place you return to in people, in places, in moments that remind you you are not too much. You are not too strange. You are not alone. You're already belonging to yourself. And that's where it begins. What if love isn't enough? You love someone deeply, honestly. You give your best words, your softest patience, your rawest truths. You hold space for their fears. You cheer for their joy, and still, something fractures, something slips. The distance grows, the warmth fades. You reach, and they don't reach back. And you ask yourself the question you hoped you'd never have to. What if love isn't enough? We grow up believing that love conquers all, that if you love someone, truly love them, it will be enough to keep them close, to fix the hurt, to bridge the gap. But love is not magic. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't dissolve difference. It doesn't erase trauma. It doesn't fill every silence or cure every wound. Sometimes two people love each other and still grow apart, not because they failed, but because life shifted, timing missed, wounds clashed, or because the love they offered was real but shaped like two different languages, neither of which could quite translate what the other most needed. Love is not always the problem, but it's not always the solution either. We think love should be enough because we know how much it costs to give, to open your heart, to let someone in, to build a life around that vulnerability. It feels like a sacred offering. When it's not received, or when it stops being enough to sustain the relationship, it can feel like a betrayal, as if the universe has broken some unspoken promise, as if all that bravery went unseen. But maybe love isn't meant to fix everything. Maybe it's meant to illuminate, to show you what matters, to remind you what you're capable of feeling, to teach you how deep your empathy can go, how fiercely you can care, how much beauty exists in connection even when it ends. Maybe love isn't always the glue. Maybe sometimes it's the lesson, or the mirror, or the spark that helped you see something in yourself you hadn't before. And still, it hurts. Because if love isn't enough, then what is? Compatibility, timing, communication, willingness, shared vision? All of those matter. All of those shape whether love can thrive. But none of them make love less sacred. They just remind us that love by itself is not invincible. It is tender. It is powerful. But it is not all-powerful. So what if love isn't enough? Then maybe what matters is how you carry it, how you let it change you, how you honor it, even when it doesn't last. Maybe the fact that you loved fully, honestly, without holding back, is enough for something, enough to heal something in you. enough to soften someone else, enough to stand as proof that your heart was open, even in a world that can close so easily. Even if it wasn't enough for everything. Are we pretending to be close? You sit across from someone. You laugh, nod, share stories. There's eye contact. There's warmth. On the surface, it looks like connection. But inside, there's a quiet question. Do they really see me? Or are we both playing parts, mirroring what closeness should look like while hiding what closeness would actually require? We live in a world full of conversation, yet starving for connection. We know how to perform presence without offering it. We ask, "How are you?" but rarely wait for the real answer. We scroll past each other's lives, double tap a smile, and call it intimacy. We talk, but don't reveal. We listen, but don't absorb. We touch, but don't feel. Are we pretending to be close? Sometimes, yes. Not out of malice, but out of habit. Because real closeness is risky. It asks for vulnerability, for silence, for contradiction. It asks us to let go of control, to say things that don't fit neatly into polished scripts, to admit confusion, pain, desire. And that level of honesty doesn't always feel safe. So we default to imitation. We rehearse empathy. We nod at confessions we don't understand. We say, "I'm here for you," when we don't know what that means. We offer advice instead of presence. We comfort when we should just witness. We mirror concern without anchoring it in presence. And we convince ourselves that being nearby is the same as being connected. But real closeness is messier. It means asking uncomfortable questions, sitting in uncomfortable silences, letting someone else's truth exist without editing it, letting your own truth rise without apology. It means feeling the weight of someone's presence, not just their performance. It means being there without needing to fix, advise, or distract, just being, fully. And it's rare, because many of us weren't taught how to hold that kind of space. We learned to keep things smooth, manageable, pleasant. But real closeness doesn't live in smooth. It lives in the moments when someone breaks and you don't look away, when someone speaks and you don't rush to fix it, when you're fully there, not as a role, but as a witness. When you risk being changed by someone else's truth and allow them to be changed by yours. So are we pretending to be close? Maybe more often than we'd like to admit. But the fact that you're asking, the fact that you feel the difference, that's where closeness begins. In the desire to go deeper, to know and be known, to step beyond the comfort of pretending and into the beautiful, difficult truth of being real. Because real closeness isn't about saying the right thing, it's about staying when there's nothing to say at all. Is intimacy an illusion? You sit with someone and share a secret. They nod, lean in, maybe even say, "I feel the same." For a moment, it feels like the gap between you disappears, as if your mind has reached theirs, as if you are no longer two separate selves, but something momentarily joined. This is what intimacy promises, that we can be seen, understood, known, not just observed, but truly felt. But the mind is a locked room. No matter how close you get to someone, there are things they'll never see, thoughts you'll never say, feelings you don't have words for, parts of you that remain silent, even in the loudest moments of love, and you begin to wonder, was that closeness real, or just a projection? Was the connection mutual, or just your hope reflected back? Is intimacy an illusion? We crave it. Not just touch or time, but the feeling that someone truly gets us, that we don't have to translate, perform, or filter, that our weirdness, our wounds, our wonderings, all of it can live in the open. But that kind of understanding is fragile. Misunderstandings creep in, assumptions build, language fails, and you realize how easy it is to feel alone, even in someone's arms. You speak the same words, but they land differently. You hear "I love you" but don't know if it means what it used to. You say "I'm fine" and hope they see you're not. We speak of knowing, someone like it's a destination. But people aren't destinations. They're processes, shifting, unfinished, filled with contradictions. You never know someone entirely. You know versions. You know what they show you. You know the echoes of their experience, refracted through your own, and they know you the same way, through haze, not clarity. Even long after a relationship ends, you discover new layers you didn't know were there, because knowing isn't fixed. It's always incomplete. And yet something still happens in the reaching. Even if we can't fully know each other, we still try. We build bridges, however shaky. We whisper into the unknown and hope something echoes back. We create closeness, not by erasing the space between us, but by honoring it, by staying anyway. Because something sacred exists in that space. The effort, the vulnerability, the willingness to try. Maybe intimacy isn't about merging. Maybe it's about witnessing, about saying, I see you, even when you can't fully understand, about letting someone be a mystery and loving them for it, about letting yourself be seen, even when you know you can't be fully known. It's about choosing presence over certainty, curiosity over control, softness over strategy. Is intimacy an illusion? Maybe. But maybe illusions can still be sacred. Maybe they can still change us. Maybe the attempt is the truth. Because even if we're each alone in our minds, we're still reaching. And sometimes that reach is enough. Is free will just a story? You make a choice, or so it seems. You reach for the coffee instead of the tea. You turn left instead of right. You text instead of call. It feels like you decided, like your will pushed the world in one direction instead of another. But what if you didn't choose at all? What if the decision was made long before it reached your awareness, by habit, by neurons, by forces outside your control? Free will feels obvious. Until you examine it, then it becomes slippery. Every thought you have is shaped by a mind you didn't build. Every preference comes from a lifetime of experiences you didn't script. Genetics, culture, language, emotion, these are the architects behind your decisions. And still you claim the building as your own. You feel the pride of choice without questioning who designed the walls or where the exits lead. Is free will just a story? A comforting one? A necessary one? Without it, responsibility dissolves. Morality fractures. How do you hold someone accountable for a choice they were never free to make? How do you forgive yourself if every mistake was inevitable? The idea of free will gives us structure. It makes us feel like authors, like agents, like we are more than puppets pulled by biology and fate. It allows us to take ownership of redemption, not just error. But science complicates the picture. Brain scans show decisions forming milliseconds before we're conscious of them. Patterns of behavior emerge from conditions more than intention. Neuroscience whispers that what feels like choice might just be awareness catching up to momentum. And still, we feel the weight of choice. We suffer its consequences. We mourn what might have been. We celebrate what we overcame. Even if the freedom was partial, the impact was real. The pain was real. The healing was real. So maybe free will isn't a lie. Maybe it's a layer, a higher order function. Maybe we don't control the first thought, but we influence the second. Maybe our will isn't free from everything, but it's freer than nothing, a constrained freedom, a meaningful illusion, one that allows us to revise, redirect, rewrite, not from a blank slate, but from a moment of reflection. Is free will just a story? Or maybe it's something else entirely, not the power to act without influence, but the power to reflect, to step back from a reflex and ask, is this what I want to be? To notice the scripts we've inherited and slowly, painfully rewrite them, to become aware of the machinery and still press against it. To choose our posture, even if we didn't choose the terrain, to bring intention where there once was only inertia. Maybe, but stories have power. Stories shape reality, And if believing you have a choice leads you to become someone better, more kind, more thoughtful, more awake, then maybe that's the truest kind of freedom there is. Why is doing good so hard? You want to be kind. You want to help. You want to be the person who lifts others, who chooses the better path. And yet, when the moment comes, hesitation creeps in. You wonder if your help will be welcomed, if your gesture will be misunderstood, if your effort will even matter. Sometimes you act, but it feels awkward, incomplete. Sometimes you don't, and carry the guilt. Why is doing good so hard? It should be simple. Kindness, empathy, generosity, these should come easily, but life is complicated. People are complicated, and your own mind is a maze of doubts, fears, and contradictions. You want to give, but not be used. You want to forgive, but not forget. You want to stand up, but not stand alone. Doing good asks you to step beyond comfort, and comfort rarely lets go without a fight. There's also the weight of uncertainty. You want to do the right thing, but what is the right thing? Is it telling the truth, even if it hurts? Is it letting go, even if it looks like giving up? Is it speaking out or staying quiet so others feel heard? Ethics aren't formulas. They're context, timing, nuance. And often, you only know what was right after it's too late to choose. Rightness is not a road sign. It's a reflection seen only in hindsight. Doing good is hard because it's not rewarded evenly. Sometimes your efforts go unnoticed. Sometimes your kindness is taken for weakness. You watch others act selfishly and thrive, while you wrestle with the invisible cost of conscience. The world doesn't always mirror back the goodness you offer, and that can make it feel like you're walking uphill, alone. Especially when others mock what they call naivete, while you're just trying to be decent in a cynical age. And then there's exhaustion, compassion fatigue. The weariness that creeps in when your giving feels endless and the need feels infinite. Doing good can drain you, especially if you forget to care for yourself in the process. You start to wonder if it's worth it. If you're making a difference, if the small acts even add up. And yet you still feel the pull to try. But maybe that's what makes it good, that it costs something, that it isn't automatic, that it asks you to choose, not once, but repeatedly, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's lonely, even when no one claps. Maybe goodness isn't about outcome at all. Maybe it's about effort, about choosing to care in a world that teaches you not to, about doing the right thing, not because it works, but because it's right. Not because it's easy, but because it's human. So why is doing good so hard? Because it's real. Because it matters. Because it shapes the kind of person you are becoming, not just when the world is watching, but especially when it isn't. Because every time you choose kindness, even in silence, even in struggle, you are pushing back against the gravity of indifference. And that is never easy. Can purpose be created? You search for it, in work, in love, in legacy, that sense of direction, that reason behind the struggle, that feeling that your life fits into something bigger than you. But sometimes, no answer arrives, no calling speaks, no sign points. And in that silence, a deeper question emerges: can purpose be found, or must it be made? We're taught to look for it, as if purpose is hidden somewhere out there waiting to be uncovered, like a secret buried in your DNA or written in the stars. But what if it's not? What if it doesn't arrive like destiny, but grows like a muscle? What if it's not something you discover, but something you build? Can purpose be created? Creation is active. It's deliberate. It's slow. It means facing the void and choosing anyway. It means trying things that don't feel grand or cosmic, just honest. It means paying attention to what pulls you forward, even slightly. What makes you lose track of time? What makes your breath slow? What makes your heart ache in a way that feels like truth? It's not always beautiful. Sometimes it looks like failure, like starting over, like getting it wrong again and again until something fits. But that effort, that imperfect reaching, is part of the purpose itself. There's a myth that purpose must be profound, that it has to involve saving the world or changing lives. But sometimes purpose is quieter. To listen well, to raise a child with gentleness, to heal your lineage, to turn pain into art, to plant something that outlives you, to make beauty in a world that forgets how. Purpose can be personal, invisible to others, irreplaceable to you. You don't need permission to create purpose. You don't need certainty. You don't even need belief. All you need is a willingness to engage, to keep shaping meaning even when everything around you feels meaningless, to decide that your presence matters because you say it does. Purpose is not something you find in a book or inherit from a higher place. It's something you breathe into the everyday, into how you treat people, into how you rise after falling. And maybe that's what purpose really is. A decision, a practice, a whisper that turns into a voice, that turns into a vow. Not to have it all figured out, but to keep showing up, to keep choosing, to keep shaping your life into something that feels like yours. It might not look extraordinary, but it can be deeply real. Can purpose be created? Yes. And maybe that's the most powerful kind, not assigned, not inherited, but chosen, again and again, in the face of nothing, and through that choosing, becoming something more than you were before. What if nothing matters? You wake up, you move through your day, you check the boxes, say the words, go through the motions, but underneath it all, a quiet question lingers. Whispers, really, what's the point? Why do any of this if none of it lasts? If the universe is indifferent, if time erases everything, if you and everyone you love are just temporary flickers in a cosmic night, what's the point? What if nothing matters? It's a terrifying thought, one that echoes in late-night silence or after heartbreak or failure, one that gnaws at the edges of your convictions. We build our lives on meaning, careers, relationships, beliefs, dreams. And yet behind all of them looms a truth. Everything ends. The sun will burn out. The stars will fade. Memory won't hold. Even the names etched in stone will someday be ground to dust. Even the greatest achievements will be forgotten by time. So what do you do with that? You could despair. Some do. You could numb yourself with distraction. Many do. You could abandon hope. But maybe there's another way. Maybe the absence of cosmic meaning doesn't make life meaningless. Maybe it makes meaning ours to define. Maybe in a world that offers no guarantees, the mere act of caring becomes radical. If nothing matters by default, then everything you care about becomes sacred by choice. Joy becomes sacred. Kindness becomes sacred. Creating something beautiful just because you can becomes a defiant act. A way of saying, I was here and I chose to care anyway. Love becomes braver. Art becomes louder. And small gestures one's no history book will remember become deeply human acts of rebellion against apathy. There's a strange freedom in this view. You're no longer bound by inherited narratives. You don't have to earn your place. You don't have to pretend the universe has a plan for you. Instead, you get to ask what matters to me. What kind of life do I want to shape, knowing I won't be here forever? What will I stand for, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when no one sees? When you accept that nothing is guaranteed to matter, you begin to create your own gravity. You stop chasing immortality and start seeking impact. You stop waiting for purpose to arrive and begin sculpting it from your days. You start loving more fiercely because you know it's fragile. You start noticing the way light hits a wall, the way laughter bends the air, the way holding someone's hand can change your whole day. You realize that even if the universe forgets, the moment still existed, and that's enough. So what if nothing matters? Then everything you do is a choice. And that makes it matter even more. Is morality just fear? You don't steal. You don't lie. At least not about the big things. You help when you can. You say please, say sorry, say what's expected. You try to be a good person. But if you pause and ask yourself why, what's really underneath the goodness, an unsettling thought might rise. Are you being good because it's right, or because you're afraid of what happens if you're not? Is morality just fear? Fear of punishment, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing someone, fear of seeing yourself as the villain. From childhood, you're conditioned to associate morality with consequences. Don't lie, or you'll get caught. Don't cheat, or you'll fail. Be nice, or no one will like you. And over time, those consequences become internalized. They start to feel like ethics. But are they really principles, or just rehearsed defenses? If no one were watching, would you act the same? If every law vanished and every consequence dissolved, would you still choose kindness, or would you test the boundaries of what you could get away with? The thought is uncomfortable, not because it indicts you, but because it reveals something fragile about how we define right and wrong. It exposes the quiet contracts we've made between behavior and belonging, between ethics and approval. True morality asks more. It asks who you are without the leash of fear. It asks what kind of world you believe in, even when no one's keeping score. It invites you to consider not just what you do, but why, and whether that why is rooted in integrity or just in anxiety. Do you act out of care or out of control, out of love for others, or out of a need to feel safe from judgment? But maybe fear isn't entirely false. Maybe it's a stepping stone. Maybe it trains us in restraint until something deeper can take root. Maybe we start with fear. But we don't have to end there. Over time, empathy might take its place. Understanding. A desire to reduce suffering, not because it's required, but because it's right. Because it's human. Because you've seen pain and you remember how it felt. So is morality just fear? Sometimes. But it doesn't have to be. Fear might teach the rules, but love, compassion, and reflection are what can turn those rules into values, into choices you'd make, even when no one's looking, into decisions you carry not because you must, but because they feel right in your bones. And maybe that's what real morality is, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act rightly even when fear is no longer needed, when no one's watching, when no one's keeping score, when the only voice you're answering to is your own. Are you living your own life? You wake up, check your phone, respond to messages, scroll past images of other people's routines, goals, milestones. You go to work, speak the lines expected of you, move from one obligation to the next. At some point, the day ends, and you wonder, whose day did I just live? Are you living your own life? Or are you living the life that was handed to you, shaped by parents, by culture, by expectation? The career you chose because it was practical. The relationship you stayed in because it looked right. The beliefs you hold because they were the first ones you heard. It's not always dramatic. Often it's subtle. A slow erosion of desire, a gentle detour away from who you might have been. You don't notice the shift until you're too far down a road you never meant to walk. You learn early how to please others, how to fit in, how to make choices that don't make waves. And somewhere along the way, those choices become habits. Habits become identity. And identity becomes a script you don't remember writing. Until one day the life you're living doesn't quite feel like it belongs to you. You wear your own name like a borrowed coat. Familiar, but not entirely yours. But what does it mean to live your own life? It doesn't mean abandoning everything or running away. It doesn't mean rejecting all influence. It means noticing, pausing, asking hard questions. Whose voice is this in my head? Whose approval am I chasing? Who benefits from me staying small, from me staying silent? It means peeling back the layers until you find something true, even if it scares you. Living your own life means choosing with awareness. It means letting go of stories that were written for someone else. It means disappointing people, sometimes the ones you love, so you don't have to disappoint yourself. It means stepping into uncertainty, into discomfort, into freedom. It means learning to hear your own voice, even when it's drowned out by everyone else's. And it's not easy, because the world rewards compliance, rewards predictability, but your soul rewards truth. And deep down, you know the difference. You can feel it in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when nothing is being posted, when the only thing left is how you feel about who you are becoming. You feel it in the ache of unrealized dreams, in the tension between obligation and desire, in the whisper that says, there's more. So are you living your own life? Only you can answer that. But if the answer is no, it's not too late to begin again, to revise the story, to speak in your own voice, to step off the script and onto your path, even if it starts with a whisper, even if the first step is small, even if all you do is pause long enough to listen. Why do we keep pretending? You smile when you're breaking. You say, I'm fine when you're not. You nod in agreement to avoid the pause that honesty might cause. We perform normal. We perform okay. We perform ourselves, even when the self beneath is aching, confused, or lost. And deep down, we know we're not the only ones. So why do we keep pretending? Because it's easier. Because it's safer. Because truth feels too heavy to place into someone else's hands. We don't want to be the burden, the problem, the one who makes things uncomfortable, so we wrap our real selves in practiced lines, in polished masks. In no worries and it's all good. We offer the digestible version of ourselves, thinking it's the only version that will be accepted. We pretend because we've learned that vulnerability has consequences. People pull away, they flinch, they offer fixes when we just needed to be heard. Or worse, they don't know what to say at all. And silence, when you've risked being real, can feel like rejection. So we measure every word, soften every edge. We've been taught that authenticity comes second to likability. So we build roles instead. The capable one, the funny one, the one who's always strong, the one who never needs help. And then we get trapped inside them, afraid that if we stop performing, we'll stop being loved, that if we show the cracks, the whole thing will collapse. We fear being seen as weak, needy, dramatic. So we armor up in expectations, forgetting what it's like to simply be. But the cost is high. Pretending might protect you, but it also isolates you. It keeps the real connection just out of reach. Because how can someone truly hold you if they don't know what they're holding? How can you feel seen? If you never let yourself be visible, we long for closeness, yet hide behind curtains. We ache for understanding, yet speak in coded smiles. Pretending drains you, not all at once, but slowly, quietly. It becomes harder to tell where the mask ends and the self begins. You forget how to cry honestly, how to ask for what you need without apology, how to rest without earning it first. And in that forgetting, something essential begins to fade, not just in how others know you, but in how you know yourself. We pretend because it worked once. It helped us survive. It got us through. But what helped you survive isn't always what helps you live. And sometimes, the pretending that once kept you safe becomes the very thing keeping you stuck. You outgrow the script, but keep reciting the lines. So why do we keep pretending? Because we're afraid of what might happen if we stop. But maybe the better question is, what might happen if we don't? What if the cost of pretending is deeper than the fear of being real? What if the connection we're craving only begins when the mask comes off, shaky voice, trembling hands, and all? Is regret the only constant? You look back at the words you didn't say, the chances you didn't take, the moments you misunderstood, the things you lost before you learned how to hold them. Regret is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, an ache beneath your ribs, a shadow in the mirror, a question that starts with what if. Is regret the only constant? For many, it lingers longer than joy. It survives even after the lesson is learned. It attaches itself to the version of you that didn't know better and keeps replaying the scene long after the story has moved on. Not because you want to suffer, but because part of you believes you deserve to. That if you just carry it long enough, maybe it will make things right, that the weight itself is penance. But regret doesn't fix. It remembers. It returns. It loops. And if you're not careful, it starts to shape your identity. You stop being the person who made a mistake and become the mistake itself. You wear it like skin. Let it dictate who you think you're allowed to become. It rewrites your self-worth, turns potential into apology, and builds a story around your lowest moment as if it's the only chapter worth telling. Yet maybe regret isn't meant to be a punishment. Maybe it's a signal, a sign that you cared, that you had the capacity for better, that you're still growing. Regret reveals your values, what mattered, what hurt, what you missed, not because it was meaningless, but because it meant too much. It points to your tenderness, your hope, your effort to do right, in a world where right is rarely clear. You can't live without regret. Not entirely. To live fully is to risk it. To love fully is to invite it. Every choice leaves another unexplored. Every decision closes a door. There's no perfect path, only paths taken and not. And with each comes a shadow of possibility that lingers in memory. Some doors don't reopen. Some words can't be unsaid. But still, you move forward, carrying the echo. And yet, regret doesn't have to define you. It can shape you without caging you. You can carry the lessons without clinging to the pain. You can grieve who you were and still make room for who you're becoming. The presence of regret doesn't mean you failed. It means you grew, that you've stepped beyond the person who didn't yet know what you know now, that you've begun asking better questions. So is regret the only constant? Maybe, but maybe it's not the presence of regret that matters most, but what you do with it, whether you use it to shrink or to expand, whether it hardens you or softens you, whether it becomes a weight or a compass, whether it keeps you stuck in the past or helps you walk more wisely into the future. And maybe that choice is the only constant you truly need. Because in the end, regret is not proof of failure. It's proof that you were present, that you cared, that you were alive. Can you forgive without change? Someone hurt you. Maybe they said they were sorry. Maybe they didn't. Maybe you said it didn't matter. But it did. Maybe you moved on. But a part of you stayed behind, looping the moment, trying to make sense of what happened. You tell yourself to forgive, to let go, to be bigger than the wound. But still, the question lingers, can you forgive someone who hasn't changed? Can you forgive without change? Forgiveness is often framed as a moral achievement, a sign of grace, a path to peace. But when forgiveness is asked without transformation, it can feel like a lie, like telling yourself it's okay when it's not, like patching over a crack that's still widening. It's one thing to release resentment. It's another to pretend the harm didn't matter. You start to wonder if letting go is the same thing as giving in. We want to believe people can grow, that they can see what they did, that they won't do it again. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they apologize, only to feel better, not to do better. Sometimes they want your forgiveness more than they want to be accountable. They want comfort without correction. And in those moments, forgiveness starts to feel like self-betrayal. So what does it mean to forgive? Maybe it doesn't mean reconciling. Maybe it doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it means choosing to carry less of the pain, not because it wasn't real, but because you're tired of holding it. Maybe it means breaking the loop, saying, I release this, not for you, but for me. Forgiveness, in this sense, becomes a boundary, a line drawn between what happened and what you'll allow moving forward. A decision not to let pain become your identity. But that doesn't mean there's no cost. Forgiving without change often feels incomplete, like turning the page while the ink is still wet, like planting new seeds in soil that hasn't been cleared. You hope something new will grow, but the roots still carry memory, and that memory doesn't just fade. It flares when similar patterns return. It reminds you what wasn't learned, what wasn't repaired. Can you forgive without change? Yes, but it's harder. It requires clarity. It requires knowing the difference between letting go of resentment and reopening the door. It requires choosing peace without pretending justice was served. It requires accepting that healing doesn't always come with closure, and that forgiveness is not permission for the wound to repeat. Forgiveness in this light is not approval. It's protection. It's honoring your healing more than someone else's comfort. Forgiveness is powerful, but it should never ask you to forget who you are or what you deserve. And if you forgive someone who hasn't changed, it must be from a place of strength, not surrender. From truth, not denial. From wisdom, not wishful thinking. Because forgiveness, at its best, isn't about what they did. It's about what you're willing to carry forward and what you're ready to set down. Is hope a form of denial? You hold on to a better future, to a second chance, to the idea that things can change even when there's no proof they will. Hope is the hand you reach for in the dark. The whisper that says, maybe it gets you through the long nights, the closed doors, the heartbreaks that don't explain themselves. But sometimes, quietly, the question comes, is this strength or is it denial? Is hope a form of denial? Hope is beautiful. It keeps people alive. It gives suffering a direction. It's the fuel behind every recovery, every reconciliation, every act of persistence. But hope can also hurt. It can trap you in waiting rooms. It can tie you to people who have no intention of growing. It can convince you to stay when leaving is the only sane choice. It blurs the line between loyalty and avoidance, between belief and self-betrayal. You start to confuse endurance with wisdom, patience with self-erasure. Because sometimes hope isn't faith in what could be, it's fear of facing what is. It's easier to believe that things will improve than to accept that they won't. It's easier to keep imagining a breakthrough than to grieve what's already broken. Hope lets you postpone grief, delay acceptance, deny reality. It says, not yet, even when everything around you says, this is it. And in doing so, it protects you from heartbreak, from closure, from the sting of letting go. But it also delays healing. But does that make it a lie? Maybe not. Maybe hope, like fire, is neither good nor bad. It depends on how you hold it. Hope can blind you, yes, but it can also sustain you. It can keep you soft in a world that demands hardness. It can keep you trying when everyone else has surrendered. It can breathe life into dry seasons, and sometimes hope is the only thing left standing after everything else has fallen. It can be the quiet rebellion against despair, the flicker of light that dares to keep burning. The danger is when hope becomes passive, when it replaces action, when it excuses what shouldn't be excused, when it romanticizes red flags, when it becomes a disguise for fear. Then hope becomes denial. Then it stops lifting you and starts numbing you. It becomes a sedative, not a salve, a way of standing still while calling it strength. So is hope a form of denial? Sometimes, but it's also a form of courage. The courage to imagine something better when all signs point to worse. The courage to keep showing up, to believe in a sunrise even while standing in the night. To plant seeds in soil you may never see bloom. Hope isn't blindness. It's vision that refuses to close. It's belief in possibility, not because the odds are good, but because you are willing to risk your heart anyway. Are you dying slower than you think? You feel fine. You're breathing. You're working. You're laughing at things. On the surface, life continues. But sometimes in the quiet, something inside you feels a little fainter, a little slower, like a light dimming, not all at once, but gradually, imperceptibly. And you wonder, not out of fear, but curiosity, am I dying slower than I realize? Not biologically, spiritually, emotionally, creatively. Are there parts of you fading while the body keeps going? The dream you stop chasing, the relationship you no longer nurture, the spark you used to feel when waking up that's now replaced with routine. We assume dying is an event, but maybe it's a process. Maybe we die in pieces. You stop dancing, you stop asking questions, you stop saying what you really think. And piece by piece, you begin to vanish, not to others, but to yourself. You still show up, still smile, still do what's needed. But the inner aliveness, the hunger, the wonder, the ache that made life feel vivid, starts to go quiet, and you begin to survive instead of live. Are you dying slower than you think? Maybe it starts when you trade truth for peace, when you silence your voice to avoid conflict, when you stay in places that shrink you, you justify it. Everyone's tired, everyone's busy, everyone's getting by, but deep down you know something is slipping. And the longer it goes unnamed, the harder it becomes to remember what used to be. You begin to forget what it feels like to be excited, to be moved, to feel awe. You forget that you once dreamed without permission, spoke without rehearsing, laughed without checking the room. You become efficient, predictable, dull in a way that others don't notice. But you do. And maybe that's the scariest part, not that the world forgets who you are, but that you do. Sometimes the signs are small. You cancel plans you once would have anticipated. You turn down opportunities without even considering them. You say, I'm just tired, but the tired never goes away. It's not sleep you need. It's something deeper, something rekindled, something only you can name. That longing isn't laziness, it's a message. But slow death isn't final. It's a warning, a chance to turn around. Because if you can die in pieces, you can come back in pieces too. One decision, one boundary, one honest conversation, one rediscovered joy. Aliveness doesn't return all at once. It returns in pulses, in breath, in color, in moments where you feel yourself again, even briefly. So ask yourself, not in judgment, but in kindness, where am I going numb? What part of me has gone quiet? What would it take to listen again, to risk again, to live like I'm still becoming, instead of slowly disappearing? Because you're still here. And that means there's still time. Will anything of you remain? You move through life, moment by moment, thought by thought. You leave traces, footsteps, fingerprints, laughter in rooms no longer yours. You shape people, places, stories. But when it's all over, when the last breath fades and time carries on without you, what remains? Will anything of you remain? You won't be here to keep the memories straight, to clarify what you meant, to correct the story. People will remember you not as you were, but as they felt you. Their version of you will evolve, soften, fade. You will become fragments, some cherished, some misunderstood, some erased by silence. Maybe it's your words. A note, a message, a lesson repeated long after you're gone. Maybe it's the way someone you loved loves someone else, kinder, gentler because of you. Maybe it's a shift in someone's path, a door you opened they never would have knocked on without your presence. But memory is fragile. Names fade. Photos are lost. Generations pass. Eventually, even the echo of your echo disappears. And that truth can feel crushing, like nothing we do will ever be enough to outlast time. That we are borrowed light, destined to dim. That even the deepest footprints are eventually covered by new dust. That even your loudest moments will become a faint whisper in someone else's archive. But maybe what remains isn't a monument. Maybe it's a ripple. Maybe it's not about being remembered forever, but about having mattered once. About the way you made someone feel less alone. The truth you spoke when it was hard. The life you lived with enough courage that someone else believed they could too. Not because they knew your name, but because they felt your impact in their own. Maybe what lasts isn't a legacy, it's a pattern, a shift, a slightly different world than it would have been without you. You held the door open longer than expected. You listened when no one else did. You made someone feel seen. You became a moment in someone else's turning point. You altered the direction of something small, but real. And maybe, long after you're gone, that ripple touches someone you never met. Maybe someone else holds their tongue, or speaks their truth, or takes a deep breath because you once did. Maybe they never learn your name, but carry the atmosphere of your choices in their own lives. And perhaps, in a world constantly moving forward, you become the unseen pause, the silent encouragement that outlives explanation. We think what matters is what we leave behind in stone. But maybe it's what we leave behind in someone's breath. A hesitation, a moment of bravery, a softness where there could have been bitterness. Maybe you'll be the reason someone chooses gentleness over pride, or tries again instead of giving up. Will anything of you remain? Yes, but not in the way you imagine. Not in stone, not in story, in sensation, in influence. In changes too small to name, but too real to deny. You are not carved into history, but you are etched into experience. In the spaces between people, in the courage that travels unspoken, in the kindness passed on without a name. You are not timeless, but you are not nothing, and that might be enough. Are you forgotten in pieces? You imagine forgetting as an event, sudden, dramatic, final. A name slips, a face fades, and you're gone. But what if forgetting isn't a moment? What if it's a slow erosion? What if you aren't erased all at once, but in pieces, scattered over time like ash across memory? Maybe it starts with the sound of your laugh, once clear in someone's mind, now faint, now gone. Maybe it's a shared joke no one repeats anymore. The way you tied your shoes, the way you answered the phone, tiny details that once made you distinct, now melt into the background. Not because anyone meant to let go, but because life keeps going and memory has limited space. People remember milestones, birth, death, maybe a photo, a signature. But the small things, the pauses in your speech, the things you loved but never said aloud, those are the first to vanish. You live a life rich in detail, but you are remembered in summary, in impressions, in the vague warmth of having once existed, and even that warmth cools with distance. You are not forgotten like a book returned to a shelf. You are forgotten like a streetlight, blinking out at dawn quietly, gradually, without announcement. Someone says your name less often, then not at all. Someone keeps the keepsake, then forgets its story. The people who remember you best are gone, and those who remain never knew you fully. And still, the world spins. Still, the clock ticks. Still, you dissolve, one association, one ritual, one memory at a time. Even the places you love change. The cafe you visited is repainted, renamed. Your favorite walking path is repaved. The songs you played are remixed, then replaced. Life doesn't pause to preserve what mattered to you. And so, little by little, your place in it is rewritten, not maliciously, but inevitably. New memories overwrite the old. New lives occupy the space you left behind. Are you forgotten in pieces? Yes. And maybe that's what makes remembering sacred. Maybe the fragments that do endure, the recipe passed down, the favorite phrase, the echo of your compassion, become more precious because they survived the erosion. Maybe someone still says something you once said without knowing its source. Maybe a stranger loves the same song you did and carries a piece of you unknowingly. Maybe a child hears a story shaped by your decisions, though your name is no longer attached. Maybe you're a lesson, a metaphor, a guiding shadow. And maybe you do the same for others. You carry words that weren't yours. Mannerisms borrowed from someone long gone. Emotions shaped by ghosts you never met. You forget in pieces. You are forgotten in pieces. But you also remember in pieces. and you pass those pieces on. Memory is a mosaic built from fragments, uncertain, beautiful, incomplete. Maybe that's the true shape of legacy, not permanence, but persistence. Not monuments, but fragments. Not being fully remembered, but never completely lost. Not immortality, but influence, drifting quietly from one life to the next. And in that gentle passing, maybe something of you survives, not whole, but real. Can you accept never being again? You've imagined your death. The quiet room, the final breath, the moment your name becomes past tense. But after that, what happens? The world keeps turning. The seasons go on. People remember, then forget. Your story reaches a full stop. And somewhere in that stillness, a deeper question surfaces: can you accept never being again? Not just dying, not just absence, but the end of everything you know as you. No awareness, no perspective, no return, not a slumber, not a long dream, not waiting to be remembered. Just nothing. A silence so complete, it doesn't even echo. A disappearance so thorough the idea of it still trying to imagine itself becomes impossible. It's hard to grasp because everything about your life teaches you presence. You wake each day into a version of continuity. You speak, and there's sound. You think, and something stirs. Even your pain affirms that you exist. The body hurts, the mind spins, the breath catches. All signs of a self, alive and happening. But what if that self vanishes, and not into some new form, not into mystery, but into total cessation? Can you accept never being again? Not being forgotten, being non-existent, no witness, no feeling, no second chance. We're taught to resist this idea. Religions promise afterlives. Philosophies propose continuity. Memories offer the illusion of survival. There's comfort in imagining we go on, even if we don't know how. But beneath that comfort often lies fear, a fear of ending so total we invent meaning, just to soften the edge. Yet if you truly let yourself sit with it, not in despair, but in honesty, you might find something else. A strange kind of freedom. If there's no next chapter, then this is it. This is all you get. Every sunrise, every kiss, every tear, every kindness, you won't see them again. That doesn't diminish them. It sharpens them, makes them vivid, urgent, alive. Even sorrow, when framed by finality, glows differently. Even disappointment feels worthy of attention. If you can accept never being again, you might stop performing for eternity. You might stop holding back your joy, or deferring your dreams, or waiting for the perfect moment. You might live more truthfully, not because anything waits beyond this life, but because nothing does. You might forgive more quickly, speak more gently, and laugh more freely, not to impress, but to experience. Can you accept never being again? Not easily, not fully, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's not about making peace with nothingness, but about using that knowledge to deepen your love for everything. Maybe it's about walking the earth like it's borrowed, speaking like your voice will vanish, touching like your hands will forget. Maybe it's not a threat. Maybe it's a reminder. Because if you never exist again, this is your one chance to feel, to care. To make someone laugh, to make someone pause, to make the world a little lighter. Even for a second, to cry when it hurts, to dance without rhythm, to fall in love with something as simple as sunlight through a window. And if that's all you get, then maybe it's enough. Is death the only truth? Everything else seems uncertain. Your plans change. Your thoughts contradict themselves. Even your memories shift over time, reshaped by emotion and distance. You've doubted your beliefs. You've outgrown identities. You've questioned love, reality, even your own sense of self. But one thing has never left the room. Death, quiet, waiting, undeniable. The only truth that doesn't flinch when you look it in the eye. Is death The only truth. From the moment you're born, it walks beside you. Invisible most days, yet closer than your shadow. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't demand your attention, but it's always there in the corners of conversations, behind the ache in your back, in the moments when everything feels just a little too quiet. You may not speak its name often, but you know it's coming. It's the one story that will never be interrupted. The only promise that will never be broken. We surround ourselves with distractions. We talk about goals, futures, ambitions. We argue over opinions. We build empires of meaning out of work, love, and belief. But death doesn't care about your resumes. It doesn't wait for closure. It doesn't give you time to finish the sentence. When it comes, and suddenly, all the noise you once clung to goes silent. And yet it's that silence that sharpens the shape of life. Knowing death is real doesn't have to lead to despair. It can lead to clarity. It can strip away the trivial. When you remember you're going to die, some things just stop mattering. The grudges you held, the image you protected, the arguments you rehearsed. They dissolve in the light of finality. And what's left? The truth of what you care about, of what you regret, of who you love. Death is the measure we try to ignore, but it's also the only one we all share. It levels us, strips us of illusions. Beneath it, we are all just moments in motion, fragile, temporary, beautiful. It turns every second into something sacred, every goodbye into a gamble, every act of kindness into a legacy. Is death the only truth? Maybe not. Maybe love is also a truth, maybe awareness, maybe suffering, but all of them are shaped, framed, and ultimately ended by death. It defines the container, the walls of the room. It gives life its urgency, its edge, its tenderness. It makes time precious. It makes meaning necessary. Without it, nothing would truly matter, because nothing would ever be at risk. Death is not just an end, it's a context, a force that humbles you, quiets you, and invites you to pay attention to the taste of your coffee, the texture of your skin, the laughter of someone you love, the passing of clouds. It doesn't demand panic. It demands presence, not fear, but reverence. It doesn't lie. It doesn't change its mind. It doesn't forget you. It simply waits. And in doing so, it reminds you that life is not something to solve, but something to feel, not something to win, but something to experience. And the fact that it ends, that's what makes it real. Still, we run. We distract ourselves with the future. We tell ourselves there's time, that we'll call them tomorrow, that we'll start living after the next milestone. But death doesn't honor deadlines. It doesn't care about your calendar. And so the truth remains, every day is a dice roll, every breath a borrowed gift. So, is death the only truth? Maybe, or maybe it's the doorway to the rest of them. Because when you face it, truly face it, something happens. You soften, you slow down, you love more honestly, you hurt more cleanly. You stop trying to control everything and start asking better questions. Like, what matters if this ends? Who am I without forever? What will I leave behind? Not in stone, but in feeling. And in that space between the fear and the letting go, you may find something that feels like peace. Or if not peace, then at least honesty. The kind that can't be shaken. The kind that frees you. So no, death may not be the only truth, but it is the one that never blinks. The one that never lies. And the one that, whether you face it or not, is already shaping the way you live. It is the end. And if you let it, it is the beginning of what really matters. Why pretend death is far away? We plan months in advance. We book vacations for summers we haven't reached. We schedule appointments, renew subscriptions, set 5-year goals. We speak as if we are guaranteed tomorrow, as if the rhythm of our days is endless. But beneath that planning is a quiet truth. We rarely say aloud, death isn't far. It never was, and pretending otherwise doesn't push it back. Why pretend death is far away? Maybe because we have to function, to laugh at dinner, to argue over groceries, to fall in love without hesitation, to live as if life is stable, even though it never is. The illusion of distance helps us stay grounded, but that illusion comes at a cost. It makes us delay. It lets us postpone meaning. We hold back our words. We ignore our intuition. We think we'll fix it later. We think we'll be better later. We think we have time. But time isn't guaranteed. Not a single breath. Not a single conversation. You've seen it happen. The phone call that changed everything. The diagnosis no one expected. The goodbye that never had a chance to be said. Death doesn't send a warning. It doesn't knock politely. And still, we treat it like a stranger in a distant land. Why? Because it's terrifying. Because it ends everything we know. Because the moment we let death feel close, life starts to look different. The things we care about shift. The roles we play seem thinner. The pressure to perform becomes absurd. The masks feel heavy, and that clarity, it can be uncomfortable. It can break routines we've clung to for safety. So we look away. We bury it in metaphors. We dress it in euphemisms. We talk about people passing or moving on because the idea of someone simply stopping feels too brutal, too final, too real. We need it softened, filtered, blurred. But death isn't blurry. It's sharp, immediate. It cuts without negotiation. And that's exactly why it deserves our attention. When you stop pretending death is far away, something happens. You start living differently. You say, I love you more. You forgive sooner. You take fewer things personally. You listen harder. You cry more often. But it feels clean. You laugh more easily, but it feels earned. You move through life like someone who knows the value of now. The fear doesn't vanish, but it becomes something else. It becomes reverence. It becomes permission. Permission to let go of what drains you. Permission to pursue what stirs you. Permission to make mistakes and be human and be here. You stop trying to become someone and instead start being someone. You stop saving your favorite things for later. You stop waiting to be ready. You stop pretending there will be a better moment. You recognize that this messy, tender, complicated now is the only stage you've ever had. And if death is near, then everything is vivid. The sunlight through your window. The way someone says your name. The taste of a familiar meal. The silence after a deep breath. The forgiveness that once felt impossible. All of it glows with meaning, not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. So why pretend death is far away? Maybe because closeness is painful, but maybe closeness is also liberating. Maybe the nearness of death doesn't shrink life. It deepens it. Maybe it teaches you to be gentle with yourself and fierce with your joy. Maybe it asks you to live without guarantees and to love without rehearsals. And maybe the greatest tragedy isn't dying. It's living like you won't. So stop waiting for a wake-up call. Let this be it. Let the truth that you are temporary make you bold, make you soft, make you honest. Let it make you alive. Death isn't far. It never was. But neither is life. And the two, when held together, make every breath a miracle. Is there dignity in disappearing? You live your life trying to leave a mark, to be remembered, to matter. You work, love, build, share. You strive to become something that lasts. But what if you don't? What if everything you are fades into the background, unnoticed, unrecorded, unpreserved? What if you disappear, not in tragedy, but in silence? Is there dignity in that? We're taught to equate impact with permanence, that to live well means to be known, to be praised, to be written about, or memorialized. But history forgets most people, not out of malice, out of scale, out of time. And so the question becomes, does life lose its value if no one remembers it? Does a moment matter if it leaves no trace? Maybe dignity isn't found in legacy. Maybe it's found in presence, in the quiet way you held someone when they broke, in the invisible labor of kindness, in the laugh you sparked in a stranger, in the way you chose empathy when bitterness would have been easier. Maybe it's in the life you shaped, not the record you left. You won't know how you're remembered, or if you are. People forget faces. Voices blur. Photos fade. Even names are lost in time. But dignity isn't measured by memory. It's measured by intention, by courage, by how deeply you showed up in your one brief, fleeting chance to be. Disappearing doesn't mean you failed. It means you were temporary, like everything else. Like the bloom that never made it to a vase. Like the song sung only once. Like the sunset that lit the sky but left no shadow. Beautiful, ephemeral, complete. There's something sacred in letting go of the need to be seen, to walk through the world without leaving a trail, and still walk with purpose, to love without proof, to give without documentation, to matter to someone, and let that be enough. And maybe disappearing isn't vanishing. Maybe it's dissolving back into the fabric you came from. Maybe it's a return to stillness, to source, to silence. The ocean doesn't remember every wave, but it needs each one to be whole. The sky forgets the wind, but the wind still moves the trees. We think disappearance is loss, but maybe it's freedom. Freedom from comparison, from ego, from the exhausting chase to be significant. Maybe the most human thing you can do is to live fully, love fully, and then let go without fanfare, without applause. Because the world doesn't need more legends, it needs more presence, more people who treat a moment like it matters, even if no one else is watching, more souls who choose beauty over validation, integrity over credit, depth over recognition. Is there dignity in disappearing? Yes. If you let go of the need to be noticed, if you trade the spotlight for the candlelight, if you recognize that to live deeply is enough, even if you vanish in the end, the mountain doesn't ask for statues, the wind doesn't sign its name, and still they are real. They shape everything. Maybe dignity isn't about being remembered. Maybe it's about being real. Will the world notice you're gone? You wonder sometimes, in the quiet moments, will it matter when you're no longer here? Will the world feel different? Will the days shift even slightly in your absence? Or will everything carry on as if nothing happened, as if you were never part of it to begin with? Will the world notice you're gone? There's a part of you that hopes it will, that the people you love will remember your laugh, that your empty chair will echo, that the routines you touched will feel a little off, that the space you took up will feel hollow. Even if just for a while, we want to believe we matter enough to leave a gap. Enough to be missed, enough to be felt. But the world is busy. It spins, it adapts, it heals in its own way. Traffic doesn't pause. Emails keep arriving. Birthdays are still celebrated. People fall in love. Your favorite cafe still opens in the morning. And over time, the memory of you changes. It softens. It gets folded into other memories, other stories. That's not cruelty. That's how time works. So will the world notice. Not all of it, not most of it, but maybe that was never the point. Maybe you were never meant to impact the world in grand, sweeping gestures. Maybe your legacy isn't in the headlines or the history books. Maybe it's in the moments no one saw, the hand you held during a panic attack, the meal you made when someone was too tired to cook, the time you stayed on the phone longer than you had to. We think of impact in terms of permanence, but maybe it's better measured in presence, in the depth of your gaze when someone needed to feel seen, in the way your words made someone breathe easier, in the way your silence held space for someone else's pain. Maybe the world won't notice you're gone, but someone's world will. Maybe they won't say your name every day. Maybe they won't visit your grave, but they'll carry pieces of you in their choices, in their resilience, in their kindness. You changed their trajectory, even slightly, and they changed someone else's. like ripples you never see but are still moving. And maybe that's enough. We fear being forgotten. We think it means we didn't matter, but you weren't here to be permanent. You were here to be real, to be a living, breathing, imperfect force of love and effort and mistake and growth. You weren't here to last forever. You were here to touch what was in front of you, and you did. Maybe your absence won't shake the sky. Maybe the world won't pause, but someone will hesitate. Someone will think of you at an unexpected moment. A song will remind them, a phrase, a smell, and for a moment, you'll be back. Not in body, but in emotion, in memory, in the invisible thread that connects one soul to another. Will the world notice you're gone? No, not the whole world. But the part you touched will, and the part it touched will pass that noticing along until it reaches places your name never did. And maybe that's the only kind of immortality that matters. What if the end already came? We imagine endings as something future-bound, a final scene, a clean break, something loud, decisive, unmistakable, the last breath, the final word, the moment when everything stops and silence takes over. But what if the end wasn't sudden? What if it already happened and you didn't notice? Maybe it wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a quiet slipping away, the dream you stopped chasing, the part of you that grew silent, the relationship that faded while you both smiled. Maybe the world didn't fall apart, it just drifted far enough that you stopped feeling its edge. Maybe you thought you were in the middle of something, but you were already at the after. Endings aren't always marked. They don't always come with closure. Sometimes they arrive unnoticed, masked as routine. The day you stopped laughing from your gut. The morning you didn't say, "I love you" back. The project you shelved and never returned to. You didn't call it an ending because there was no funeral, but it was still a death. A soft one. A slow one. We're trained to keep going, to keep showing up, to convince ourselves we're still in it, still building, still becoming. But sometimes we're just coasting through the echo of what used to be. We carry the shell. We repeat the motions. We speak the words. But the spark, the pulse that made it real, has already gone. And we don't admit it because admitting it means grieving. It means facing a goodbye we didn't plan for. It means asking hard questions. When did this change? Why didn't I notice? What part of me stopped showing up? And what have I been pretending? But there's power in recognizing the end, even a quiet one. There's dignity in calling something finished, even if no one else sees it. There's clarity in saying, "This part of me is over," and letting it go. Because until you name the end, you can't begin again. What if the end already came? Then maybe what you need isn't more endurance, but release. Maybe you don't need to keep fixing it. Maybe you need to mourn it. Maybe you need to bury the illusion and plant something new. Maybe your tiredness isn't laziness, but a message that something ended, that you've been dragging its ghost behind you, hoping it will come back to life. It won't. And that's okay. Because every ending, even unnoticed, opens space for reinvention, for rest, for something honest. The end of pretending, the end of pleasing, the end of trying to resuscitate what no longer breathes. It can be the beginning of freedom. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to explain it to anyone. You can say, "This ended," and still be whole. You can let go of the story mid-sentence and still write a new one. You can stop performing a role that doesn't fit, even if you once loved it, even if it once saved you. What if the end already came? Then let it be an invitation to stop clinging, to stop pretending, to stop calling something alive just because it still moves. Let it be the start of honesty. Let it be the moment you come back to yourself, not with shame, but with awe. You made it this far. You survived the ending. Now what will you begin? Not because you should, but because you can. Can you let go before it's time? We're told to hold on, to try harder, to stay the course. That strength means endurance. That love means staying, no matter what. That good people don't give up. We cling to this white-knuckled, hopeful, scared. But what if the truest act of love is letting go before the ending forces itself on you? Can you let go before it's time? Not in defeat, not in avoidance, but in wisdom, in clarity, in courage. Letting go is often seen as failure, but sometimes it's the only way forward. Sometimes staying means shrinking. Sometimes holding on is a slow unraveling. Sometimes the story doesn't need one more page. It needs closure. You've felt it, that quiet ache, that whisper that something is no longer alive in the way it once was. The friendship that feels like obligation. The job that once inspired but now depletes. The identity that gave you purpose but now feels like a cage. You tell yourself to wait, to give it more time. But what are you actually waiting for? A sign? A collapse? Permission? Maybe the sign is the heaviness in your chest. Maybe the collapse already happened, just quietly. Maybe the only permission you need is your own. Letting go doesn't mean it wasn't real, doesn't mean it wasn't beautiful, doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you're listening. It means you're honest enough to admit the shape has changed. That what once fit no longer does. That you're not abandoning the story, you're honoring its ending. There's grief in it, yes, but there's also grace. There's grace in walking away with dignity, in choosing peace over performance, in saying, this no longer reflects who I am, and meaning it. There's power in closing a chapter before it collapses in your hands. We stay too long sometimes, out of loyalty, out of guilt, out of fear. But what if letting go isn't weakness? What if it's strength? What if it's the truest form of self-respect? To know when to stop, to know when enough has been given, to know when your presence no longer honors you or the thing you're holding on to. Can you let go before it's time? Yes, and maybe that's the only real way we grow, by choosing to step into uncertainty before we're forced to, by trusting our inner knowing even when the world calls it premature, by releasing the weight before it becomes unbearable. Letting go isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's soft, a quiet no, a deleted number, a key dropped on a counter, a deep breath, and a different direction. No announcement, no explanation, just a decision. To choose yourself, to choose change, to choose freedom. And letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to stop pretending. It means you value truth more than comfort. It means you're ready to write a new story, even if the ending of the last one still aches. So if something in you says it's time, even if nothing around you does, listen. The mind will argue. The heart will resist. But the soul knows. And it doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in weight, in silence, in the sense that something is already gone, even if it's still here. Can you let go before it's time? Yes, you can. And sometimes you must. Because waiting doesn't make it easier. It just makes it longer. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for sitting with the questions most people avoid, for letting silence speak, for honoring the wonder and the ache. These aren't answers to memorize. They're mirrors to reflect who you are, who you were, and who you might still become. Let them linger. Let them echo. And when the noise of the world returns, as it always does, return here, to stillness, to depth, to mystery. Until next time, sleep well, dream bravely, and never stop asking.